When 8 months pregnant Lena Cruz collapsed behind the counter of a deserted convenience store at 2 a.m., gasping through the first waves of labor, she thought she would die alone, abandoned by the man who'd promised her everything, then erased her existence with a single phone call. But the stranger who walked through those doors that night wasn't there for cigarettes or lottery tickets. Victor Romano came for something else entirely. Justice that her ex-boyfriend had evaded for years, wrapped in designer suits and political favors. Some debts, he would tell her between contractions, can only be paid in blood and truth. If you want to see how far this story of power, betrayal, and unexpected protection reaches, hit that like button and comment with your city below. Now, let's begin. The fluorescent lights of Pop's corner store buzzed with the particular frequency of things dying slowly. Lena Cruz had stopped hearing it months ago, the same way she'd stopped noticing the permanent ache in her lower back, or the way her swollen ankles no longer fit into any shoes except the ratty sneakers she'd worn through 3 New York winters. What she couldn't ignore was the weight pressing down on her pelvis, sharp and insistent, like her body had decided tonight, of all nights, was the night everything would change. "Please," she whispered to no one hand braced against the register, the other cradling the massive swell of her belly. "Not yet. Just a few more days." The baby, as usual, didn't listen. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in late September, and Lena was alone. She was always alone now. Alone in the store during the graveyard shift that paid cash under the table. Alone in the efficiency apartment she rented week to week above a laundromat. Alone in a way that made the word feel like a physical sensation, something cold that had taken up residence in her chest cavity right next to her racing heart. The last customer had left 20 minutes ago, a tired nurse grabbing coffee before her hospital shift, barely making eye contact. Lena had perfected the art of being invisible. It was safer that way. Safer than the alternative, which involved lawyers and court orders and a man with enough money and connections to make problems disappear. Problems like her. She'd been a problem for exactly 7 months now, ever since she'd shown up at Marcus Webb's downtown office building, security badge still in her purse from the days when she'd been his executive assistant and told him she was pregnant. The memory still had the power to make her hand shake. "This isn't a good time, Lena." He'd said it like she'd interrupted a meeting, not told him he was going to be a father. Like the 8 months they'd spent together, the late nights in his penthouse, the weekends in the Hamptons, the promises whispered against her skin, had been filed away in some drawer marked concluded business. "I don't know what you think is going to happen here," he'd continued, straightening his tie in the reflection of his floor-to-ceiling windows. "But I need you to understand something. I'm launching a Senate campaign next year. My future wife is the daughter of a federal judge. We have an understanding." Lena had stood there, 3 months pregnant and still foolish enough to believe in things like love and responsibility, and felt something fundamental crack inside her chest. "You knew I had plans, Lena. We talked about this." They hadn't. They talked about everything except the truth, that she'd been a convenient distraction, young and naive enough to mistake attention from a powerful man for something real. "I'll have my lawyer draw up an NDA," he'd said, finally turning to look at her with eyes as cold as January steel. "A generous settlement in exchange for your silence and a signed document stating the child isn't mine. No paternity test, no contact, no complications." When she'd refused, because some part of her still believed in doing the right thing, his expression had shifted into something that made her blood run cold. "Then I'll make sure you understand what complications actually look like." She'd left his office with her head up and her hands steady. By that evening, she'd been fired from her job for performance issues. By the end of the week, her landlord had received an anonymous complaint about lease violations that didn't exist. By the end of the month, she couldn't get hired anywhere that required a background check, couldn't get approved for an apartment anywhere decent, couldn't do anything except disappear into the city's margins and hope Marcus Webb forgot she existed. The smart move would have been to take the money and run. But Lena Cruz had never been good at doing the smart thing, especially not when it meant erasing her daughter's existence before she even took her first breath. Another contraction hit, harder this time, radiating from her lower back around to her abdomen with enough force to make her gasp. She grabbed the counter's edge, breathing through it the way the free clinic nurse had taught her, counting backwards from 10. This can't be happening. Not here. Not now. She'd planned everything so carefully. Her due date wasn't for another 3 weeks. She had enough money saved for a cab to the public hospital. She had a bag packed with clothes for the baby, all second-hand but clean, carefully washed and folded. She had a plan, and the plan did not involve going into labor alone in a convenience store in the middle of the night. The contraction peaked and slowly, mercifully, released its grip. Lena straightened, wiping the cold sweat from her forehead with a shaking hand. Maybe it was false labor. Maybe it would stop. Maybe. The door chime rang, its cheerful electronic melody absurdly out of place. Lena looked up, preparing her customer service smile, the one that said, "I'm fine, everything's fine, please buy your cigarettes and leave without words." The man who walked through the door made that smile die on her lips. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of presence that seemed to compress the air around him. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from granite, all sharp angles and harder edges. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Lena made in 6 months, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, perfectly tailored to shoulders that suggested the gym wasn't just a casual hobby. But it wasn't the suit or the build that made Lena's breath catch. It was his eyes, dark, almost black in the fluorescent light, and focused on her with an intensity that made her feel suddenly, terrifyingly seen. Not invisible anymore, not a problem to be filed away. Seen. "Evening," he said, his voice low and carefully controlled, carrying the faint trace of an accent she couldn't quite place. Italian, maybe, softened by years in America but never quite erased. "Hi," Lena managed, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. We're open. What can I help you with?" He didn't move toward the shelves, didn't even glance at the cigarettes or lottery tickets or energy drinks. He just stood there, 3 feet inside the door, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "You're Lena Cruz," he said. Not a question. Every survival instinct she'd developed over the past 7 months started screaming. She took a step back, her hip hitting the counter. "I don't know who you think I am, but—" "Marcus Webb's former assistant," he continued, taking a step closer. Not threatening, but deliberate. "Pregnant with his child. Working the night shift here because it's the only place that'll pay cash and doesn't ask questions." Terror spiked through her, sharp and immediate. "I don't want any trouble. Please, I just want to be left alone." "I'm not here to cause you trouble, Miss Cruz." He reached into his jacket, slowly, keeping his hands visible, and pulled out a business card. "My name is Victor Romano, and whether you know it or not, you've been in considerable danger for the past 7 months. Lena stared at the card he'd placed on the counter between them. Heavy stock, expensive. Just a name and a phone number, no title, no company name. "I don't understand," she said, though she was beginning to, in the way that prey understands the predator's approach, even before they see the teeth. "Marcus Webb didn't just abandon his responsibility to you," Victor said quietly. "He's been ensuring you stay silent. The eviction threats, the blacklisting, the anonymous tips to your landlord, your employers. That wasn't coincidence, Miss Cruz. That was orchestration." She'd known. Of course she'd known. But hearing it said out loud by a stranger who somehow knew everything made it real in a way that turned her knees to water. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Who are you?" Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those dark eyes, something old and patient and absolutely merciless. 4 years ago, Marcus Webb was a senior analyst at Meridian Capital. He found evidence of a money laundering operation that was moving funds through their real estate division. Instead of reporting it, he altered the audit trail to point to an innocent mid-level manager, a man with a family, a mortgage, and no political connections to protect him. Lena's hands tightened on the counter's edge. That manager lost everything: his job, his reputation, his freedom. He spent 18 months in a federal prison for crimes he didn't commit, while Marcus Webb leveraged what he knew about the real operation to secure himself a promotion, a political career, and the kind of connections that make men untouchable. "And you," Lena's voice cracked, "you're here because the operation he covered up was mine," Victor said simply. "And because I have very particular feelings about men who destroy innocent lives to advance their own interests." The store seemed to tilt sideways. Lena gripped the counter harder, trying to process what she was hearing. This man, this stranger who'd walked into her life at 2 a.m. in a convenience store, was confessing to money laundering, to being the kind of person Marcus had claimed to be fighting against. Except Marcus hadn't fought. He'd weaponized it. The manager who went to prison, she said slowly. What happened to him? He was released 8 months ago. Conviction overturned on technical grounds after new evidence came to light. Victor's expression remained neutral, but something in his tone suggested he'd had a hand in that evidence appearing. He's rebuilding his life now, carefully, quietly. Another contraction hit, harder than the others, forcing Lena to bend forward with a gasp that she couldn't quite stifle. Pain radiated through her entire lower body, insistent and overwhelming. Victor was around the counter before she could blink, his hand on her elbow, steadying her. How far apart are the contractions? He asked, his voice sharp with an authority that expected answers. I don't... She breathed through it, counting. 10 minutes, maybe less. I can't... You're in labor. No shit, she gasped out, then immediately wanted to take it back because you didn't mouth off to men who admitted to running criminal operations, except Victor's mouth quirked slightly at the corner. How long have you been having contractions? An hour, maybe more. The pain peaked and slowly released. Lena straightened, her hand still gripping Victor's forearm without meaning to. His suit jacket was soft under her fingers, expensive fabric that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. They were just Braxton Hicks, false labor. You thought wrong. He was already pulling out his phone, dialing with his free hand while keeping her steady with the other. When's your due date? 3 weeks. First baby? Yes, but then we don't have much time. He spoke into the phone, rapid-fire instructions in a language that definitely wasn't English. Italian, Lena thought distantly. He was speaking Italian to someone, his tone brooking absolutely no argument. What are you doing? She asked when he'd hung up. Taking you to the hospital. I can't afford... I'm not asking you to. Victor was already moving, taking her bag from behind the counter, locking the register with practiced efficiency that suggested he'd done stranger things in stranger places. Where's your coat? I don't need you to... Another contraction cut her off, this one barely 6 minutes after the last. Lena doubled over, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Victor's hand was on her back, warm and steady through her thin shirt. Yes, he said quietly. You do? Why? She forced the word out between gritted teeth. Why do you care what happens to me? Because, he said, waiting until the contraction passed and she could look at him again. Marcus Webb took something from someone I cared about, destroyed a good man's life to cover his own sins. I've spent 4 years waiting for the right moment to return that favor. Understanding crashed over her like cold water. I'm leverage, she whispered. No. Victor's eyes met hers, dark and absolutely serious. You're proof. You're the truth he's spent 7 months and considerable resources trying to bury. And your baby... He glanced at her belly, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. Is evidence that can't be intimidated or bought off. A black SUV pulled up outside the store, appearing so quickly that it must have been waiting nearby. Victor guided her toward the door with one hand on her elbow, supporting most of her weight as another contraction began to build. I don't want revenge, Lena said, even as she let him help her into the back seat. I don't want to be part of whatever this is between you and Marcus. Victor slid in beside her, snapping her seatbelt into place with surprising gentleness. Then what do you want, Miss Cruz? The driver, a silent, broad-shouldered man who didn't even glance back, was already pulling into traffic. Lena closed her eyes, one hand on her belly, where her daughter was fighting her way into a world that had already tried to erase her existence. I want my baby to be safe. I want her to grow up knowing the truth about who her father is, even if he never acknowledges her. I want... Her voice cracked. I want to stop being invisible. When she opened her eyes, Victor was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something that might have been respect or recognition or the particular look of someone who understood what it meant to be erased. Then we want the same thing, he said quietly. The hospital was 15 minutes away through empty streets. Lena counted contractions, 5 minutes apart, then 4. and tried not to think about what she was doing, getting into a car with a stranger who'd just confessed to criminal activity. Tried not to think about Marcus Webb and his Senate campaign and the way he'd looked at her like she was an obstacle to be removed. Tried not to think about anything except the baby girl fighting to be born, demanding her place in the world regardless of how inconvenient her existence might be to powerful men with political ambitions. "Miss Cruz," Victor said as they pulled up to the emergency entrance. "Lena." She didn't know why she offered it. "If you're going to deliver my baby, you should probably call me Lena." His mouth quirked again, that almost smile that suggested he didn't do it often. "I'm not delivering anything, but I will stay. If you'll allow it." A nurse was already approaching with a wheelchair, summoned by some invisible signal. Lena let herself be transferred from the SUV, but she grabbed Victor's hand before they wheeled her away. "Why?" she asked again, needing to understand. "Really, why?" Victor looked at their joined hands, her small and work-roughened, his larger and marked with old scars she was just now noticing, and then met her eyes. "Because 4 years ago, I watched a good man lose everything while Marcus Webb walked away untouched. Because I know what it's like to be powerless against people who believe they're above consequences." He squeezed her hand gently. "And because every child deserves to be born into a world where truth matters more than power." Another contraction hit, harder than any before. Lena gasped, doubling over in the wheelchair. "Ma'am, we need to get you inside," the nurse said urgently. Victor released her hand. "Go. I'll be right behind you." The automatic doors whooshed open. Fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells and rapid questions she could barely process. Someone was taking her blood pressure, someone else was checking her dilation, and through it all, Lena could only think about the man in the expensive suit who'd walked into her life at 2 a.m. with truth and danger and the promise of something she'd stopped believing in 7 months ago. Justice. 4 centimeters dilated, a doctor announced. "Get her into a delivery room. This baby's coming fast." They wheeled her through corridors that all looked the same, past rooms filled with other people's crises, other people's miracles. Lena's hospital gown, when had they changed her, was soaked with sweat. Her hair stuck to her forehead. Another contraction built and peaked and slowly released, each one bringing her daughter closer to a world that hadn't wanted her. "Do you have someone we can call?" a nurse asked, adjusting the monitors. "The baby's father? A family member?" "No." The word came out harder than Lena intended. "There's no one." Except there was. Outside in the waiting room, a stranger who knew her name and her history and had just upended everything she thought she understood about the past 7 months. "Miss Cruz, I need you to breathe through the next one," the doctor said. "You're progressing quickly. We're looking at active labor now." Active labor. The words that meant there was no going back, no changing her mind, no pretending this wasn't happening. Her daughter was coming whether the world was ready or not. The door opened. Lena expected another nurse, another doctor, with another question she couldn't answer. Instead, Victor Romano walked in, still wearing his suit, looking completely out of place among the medical equipment and sterile surfaces. A nurse tried to stop him, but he showed her something. A card, a badge. Lena couldn't see. And suddenly it was fine. He was cleared. He was allowed. "You can't be in here," Lena said, though she was gripping the bed rails hard enough to make her knuckles white. "You're not—" "I gave my word I'd stay," Victor said simply, taking a position near the door where he could see her, but wasn't in the medical staff's way. "I keep my word, Miss Cruz." Another contraction hit before she could argue. Lena heard herself make a sound she'd never made before, something primal and beyond words. The pain was enormous, consuming, bigger than fear or pride or any logical reason why this man shouldn't be here. "You're doing well," the doctor said. 7 centimeters now. We're getting close." Time became elastic, measured only in contractions and the spaces between them. At some point, someone adjusted the lights. At some point, someone gave her ice chips that melted on her tongue. At some point, she heard her own voice saying things she'd never say in her right mind, cursing, pleading, apologizing to her daughter for bringing her into a world this broken. And through it all, Victor Romano stood near the door, silent and steady, his dark eyes never leaving her face. 10 centimeters, the doctor announced. "Lena, when the next contraction comes, I need you to push." This was it. This was the moment when everything changed, when her daughter stopped being potential and became real, when invisible became unavoidable. I can't, Lena gasped. I can't do this alone. You're not alone. Victor's voice quiet and absolutely certain. Lena turned her head, found him still there, still watching, still present in a way no one had been for 7 months. Push, Lena, the doctor commanded. So she did. She pushed through the pain and the fear and the absolute certainty that her body was being torn apart. She pushed through the memory of Marcus Webb's cold eyes and the months of being erased. She pushed through every moment of invisibility, every night of wondering if she'd made the wrong choice, every second of terror that she'd be alone when this moment came. Again, the doctor said, I can see the head, one more big push. Lena gathered every ounce of strength she had left, every stubborn refusal to disappear, and pushed. The room filled with a sound she'd never heard before, sharp, angry, absolutely alive. Her daughter's first cry. It's a girl, the doctor announced unnecessarily, because Lena already knew, had known since the first ultrasound at the free clinic. A healthy baby girl. They placed her on Lena's chest, this tiny, furious thing covered in vernix and blood and utterly perfect. Dark hair plastered to her small skull, eyes squeezed shut against the harsh light, fists already clenched like she was ready to fight the whole world. Hi, baby, Lena whispered, tears streaming down her face. Hi, Isabella. I'm your mom. Isabella. The name she'd chosen months ago, lying alone in her efficiency apartment, promising her daughter that she'd have at least one thing, a name that meant beautiful, strong, devoted to her purpose. The nurses took Isabella to clean her up, to weigh her, to do all the things that needed doing. Lena watched them through a haze of exhaustion and endorphins and something that might have been joy if joy wasn't so close to terror. When she looked toward the door, Victor was still there. He should have left. He'd kept his word, stayed through the delivery. His obligation, if that's what this was fulfilled. But he was walking closer now, his eyes on the small bundle the nurses were wrapping in standard-issue hospital blankets. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, a nurse announced. Good strong lungs, all her fingers and toes accounted for. They brought Isabella back, placed her in Lena's arms. The weight of her was shocking. This person who hadn't existed outside Lena's body an hour ago, now separate and real and absolutely dependent. She's beautiful, Victor said quietly. Lena looked up, surprised. His expression had softened, the hard edges momentarily smoothed into something that might have been wonder. She's everything, Lena whispered. Isabella made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like an announcement that she was here and intended to be noticed. Lena adjusted her hold, marveling at how natural it felt, how right. Miss Cruz. Lena. Victor's voice brought her attention back. There are things we need to discuss, decisions you'll need to make. But not tonight. He glanced at Isabella, then back to Lena. Tonight you should rest. Tomorrow, we'll talk about what comes next. You're leaving. I'm making sure you're protected. He pulled out his phone, sent a quick text. There will be 2 men in the hallway tonight. They work for me. No one gets in this room without your explicit permission. The implications of that made Lena's chest tighten. You think Marcus will? I think Marcus Webb has spent 7 months ensuring you stay silent and powerless. I think he has a Senate campaign launching in 3 months and a reputation to protect. And I think, Victor's eyes hardened, that when he learns you've given birth, he'll need to make a choice about how much risk you represent. Fear spiked through the exhaustion. Lena pulled Isabella closer, protective instinct overwhelming everything else. He can't. He wouldn't. He already has. But Victor's voice was gentle but firm. The evictions, the blacklisting, the systematic destruction of your ability to survive. That was just the opening move. Now that Isabella exists, now that there's physical proof of his lie, he trailed off. But Lena understood the rest. Now she was a real problem. So what do I do? The question came out smaller than she'd intended, exhaustion making her feel about 16 years old instead of 28. You rest, Victor repeated. You bond with your daughter. You let yourself remember what it feels like to be cared for instead of hunted. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out another card, this one with an address. When you're ready to be discharged, call that number. I'll have an apartment waiting, secure, comfortable, yours for as long as you need it. Lena stared at the card. I can't accept. You can. Victor's tone left no room for argument. Consider it an investment in truth, if that makes it easier. Or consider it basic human decency toward a woman who just gave birth in a situation no one should face alone. I don't understand you, Lena said quietly. You say you want revenge on Marcus, but you're helping me. You admit to running a criminal operation, but you're talking about justice and truth like they matter. Who are you, really? Victor was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her with that same intensity that made her feel too seen, too known. I'm someone who believes that power without accountability is tyranny, he finally said. And I'm someone who's spent enough years in the shadows to know that sometimes the law isn't interested in justice, just in maintaining the status quo that benefits men like Marcus Webb. He moved toward the door, then paused. Get some rest, Lena. You've earned it. Victor. She stopped him with his name, surprised by how natural it felt on her tongue. Thank you for staying, for... She gestured helplessly at Isabella, at the room, at the impossible situation that had somehow resulted in her not being alone for the most important moment of her life. His expression softened again, just slightly. You're welcome. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a quiet click. Lena looked down at Isabella, who'd fallen asleep against her chest, tiny face peaceful in a way that made Lena's heart physically ache. This small person who'd existed in theory for 8 months was suddenly terrifyingly real. Real and dependent and completely innocent of the war her existence had just declared. Your daddy doesn't want to know you, Lena whispered, stroking Isabella's soft cheek. But that's his loss, baby girl. His loss and our freedom. Because I'm never going to let you think you're invisible. I'm never going to let you believe you don't matter. Isabella's hand curled around Lena's finger, grip surprisingly strong for something so small. We're going to be okay, Lena promised, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince. I don't know how yet. I don't know what happens next, but we're going to be okay. Outside the room, she could hear quiet voices. Victor's men taking up their positions, protecting her from threats she couldn't see, couldn't fight alone. The smart move would be to refuse the help, to take Isabella and disappear, find a new city, start over where Marcus Webb's influence couldn't reach. But Lena was tired of being smart, tired of disappearing, tired of letting powerful men erase her existence because acknowledging her was inconvenient. She looked at the card Victor had left on the bedside table. An address in a neighborhood she'd never be able to afford on her own. A phone number connected to a man who'd admitted to crimes but talked about truth like it mattered. Tomorrow, she'd have to make decisions. Tomorrow she'd have to figure out what it meant to accept protection from someone like Victor Romano, what price would eventually come due for safety she couldn't provide herself. But tonight she was just a mother holding her daughter, feeling her breathe, marveling at the impossible miracle of her existence. Tonight, for the first time in 7 months, Lena Cruz wasn't invisible. She was seen, protected, real. And that, she thought as exhaustion finally pulled her under, was terrifying and liberating in exactly equal measure. Isabella was 3 days old when Marcus Webb found out she existed. Lena knew the exact moment it happened because she was sitting in the armchair by the window of her new apartment, courtesy of Victor Romano, and still so surreal she kept expecting to wake up back in the efficiency above the laundromat, when her phone lit up with a number she'd deleted 6 months ago, but still recognized. Her hands, which had been gently rocking Isabella in her bassinet, went completely still. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. She didn't answer. It went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text arrived. We need to talk. Tonight. I'll send a car. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at Isabella, asleep in the early morning light, completely oblivious to the man who'd spent 7 months pretending she didn't exist. Another text arrived before she could process the first. Don't make this difficult, Lena. You know how this ends if you refuse. Her phone slipped from her trembling fingers onto the carpet. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the terror that Marcus somehow knew where she was, that his reach extended even into the sanctuary Victor had promised was safe. A knock on the door made her jump. Miss Cruz? The voice was familiar. One of Victor's men who'd been stationed outside since she'd arrived 2 days ago. Mr. Romano is here to see you. May he come in? Lena glanced at the clock. 7:15 a.m. She was still in her pajamas, hadn't brushed her hair, probably looked like exactly what she was. A new mother running on 2 hours of sleep and pure adrenaline. Yes, she called back, her voice shakier than she'd like. Please. The door opened. Victor walked in wearing different clothes than the suit from the hospital. Dark jeans, a black sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to be, looking somehow more dangerous in casual wear than he had in formal attire. His eyes went immediately to Isabella's bassinet, then to Lena's face, reading her expression with unsettling accuracy. He contacted you, Victor said. Not a question. Lena nodded toward her phone on the floor. 2 minutes ago. He wants to meet tonight. Victor picked up her phone, read the messages without asking permission. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He's panicking. That's good. Good? Lena's voice cracked. He knows where I am, Victor. He knows about Isabella. How is any of this good? He doesn't know where you are. Victor set the phone on the coffee table, his movements deliberate and calm in a way that should have been reassuring, but somehow made the danger feel more real. He's fishing. The messages are designed to make you panic, to make you reach out, to give him information he doesn't currently have. Lena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the apartment's perfect temperature. How did he even find out? I haven't contacted anyone. I've been here the whole time. Birth certificates are public record, Victor said quietly. He has people monitoring for your name. The moment Isabella's birth was registered, he knew. The implications of that settled over Lena like ice water. Marcus had been watching, waiting, ready to respond the moment she became a problem again. What do I do? She asked. He said he'll send a car. He's threatening. You do nothing. Victor's tone was absolute. You don't respond. You don't acknowledge. You certainly don't get in any car he sends. But if I ignore him, then he has no leverage. Victor moved closer, his dark eyes locked on hers. Lena, listen to me. Marcus Webb's power comes from fear and control. The moment you refuse to be afraid, the moment you refuse to be controlled, that power starts to crumble. Easy for you to say, Lena shot back, exhaustion making her reckless. You're not the one he's been systematically destroying for 7 months. You're not the one who... Isabella made a small sound from her bassinet, not quite crying, just a warning that she'd be awake and hungry soon. Lena closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... You're terrified, Victor said quietly. You have every right to be. But terror is what he's counting on. It's how men like Marcus operate. They make you so afraid of the consequences of resistance that compliance seems like the only option. And you operate differently? The question came out harder than Lena intended, but she was tired of pretending she understood what was happening, tired of accepting help from a man who'd admitted to running criminal operations. Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. I operate with accountability, he said. The people who work for me know exactly what they're agreeing to. The businesses I run may exist in legal gray areas, but no one is forced, no one is threatened, and no one has their existence erased because they became inconvenient. That's supposed to make me feel better about accepting your help? No. Victor's mouth quirked slightly. It's supposed to help you understand that I'm not Marcus Webb. I don't destroy people who trust me. Isabella's warning sound turned into an actual cry. Lena moved automatically to the bassinet, lifting her daughter with the practiced motion she'd developed over 3 sleepless days. Isabella's face was scrunched up, angry and hungry, and completely unconcerned with adult complications. I need to feed her, Lena said, suddenly aware of how intimate this was, standing in her pajamas, holding her crying baby in front of a man who was essentially a stranger despite everything he'd done for her. I'll wait in the kitchen, Victor said, already moving toward the doorway. We need to talk about next steps, but take your time. He disappeared into the other room, giving her privacy. Lena settled into the armchair, helped Isabella latch, and tried to organize her scattered thoughts into something resembling coherence. The apartment Victor had provided was nicer than anywhere Lena had ever lived. 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, a kitchen with appliances that actually worked, floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the morning light. It was in a good neighborhood, the kind where people walked their dogs at night and coffee shops stayed open late. the kind of place that should have felt safe. Instead, Lena felt like she was living in borrowed time, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Isabella finished eating and immediately fell back asleep, the way newborns did, their whole existence organized around the simple rhythm of eat, sleep, cry, repeat. Lena held her for a moment longer, memorizing the weight of her, the smell of her skin, the impossible perfection of her tiny fingers. "I won't let him hurt you," she whispered against Isabella's dark hair. "I won't let him make you disappear." When she finally emerged from the bedroom, Victor was standing by the kitchen counter, looking at his phone with an expression that suggested whatever he was reading wasn't good news. "What is it?" Lena asked, lowering Isabella back into her bassinet. Victor set his phone down. "Marcus filed a formal complaint with the NYPD 2 hours ago. He's claiming you're unstable, possibly a danger to yourself and the baby. He's requesting a wellness check." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Lena's feet. "He's what?" "It's a standard intimidation tactic," Victor said, his tone clinical. "He wants officers showing up here, questioning your fitness as a mother, creating a paper trail that suggests you're unfit. Later, when he moves for custody." "Custody?" Lena's voice came out as a strangled whisper. "He doesn't want Isabella. He made that perfectly clear." "He doesn't want her," Victor agreed, "but he can't afford for her to exist as proof of his lies. So he'll either force you into signing away paternity rights, or he'll take custody himself and ensure she disappears into some quiet adoption where she can't come back to haunt his political career." Rage, bright and burning, cut through Lena's fear. "He doesn't get to do that. He doesn't get to abandon us and then swoop in to erase her existence when it's convenient." "No," Victor said quietly. "He doesn't." Something in his tone made Lena look at him more carefully. He was too calm, too controlled, like he'd been expecting exactly this move. "You already have a plan," she said slowly. Victor's expression didn't change, but his eyes held that same patient ruthlessness she'd seen in the convenience store. "I always have a plan, Lena. The question is whether you're ready to be part of it." "What does that mean?" Instead of answering directly, Victor pulled out his phone and placed it on the coffee table between them. He tapped the screen, and Marcus Webb's voice filled the apartment. "Don't care what you have to do. Make the problem go away, permanently if necessary. I'm 3 months from announcing my campaign. I can't have some bitter ex-girlfriend showing up with a baby claiming I'm the father." Another voice, unfamiliar to Lena, responded, "What about the NDA?" "She didn't sign it. I offered her the money, offered her an easy way out, and she refused. Now she's had the baby, and every day she exists is another day my opponents can use her against me." "You want her scared enough to disappear?" "I want her gone. I don't care how it happens. Just make it happen." The recording ended. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Lena couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she'd just heard. Marcus's voice, so familiar from the months when she'd thought he loved her, talking about making her disappear, permanently, if necessary. When... She had to stop, swallow, try again. "When was that recorded?" 6 weeks ago, Victor said quietly. "One of my people has been monitoring his communications since I learned about your situation." "Why?" The question came out raw. "Why do you care this much about what happens to me?" Victor was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes studying her face. 4 years ago, I watched a good man lose everything because Marcus Webb needed a scapegoat. I watched his family fall apart. I watched his daughter drop out of college because they couldn't afford tuition anymore. I watched him come out of prison, a broken version of who he used to be." He paused. "I made a promise to myself that when the opportunity came to return that favor, I wouldn't hesitate. And I'm that opportunity." "You're proof that Marcus Webb destroys anyone who becomes inconvenient to his ambitions," Victor corrected. "You and Isabella are living evidence that everything he's built his campaign on, family values, integrity, responsibility, is a lie." Lena sank onto the couch, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "He was going to make me disappear. He was actually going to—" "Yes." Victor sat across from her, his expression serious. "Which is why I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Can you do that?" Lena nodded, not trusting her voice. "Do you want justice, or do you want safety?" The question hung in the air between them. Lena looked at Isabella, sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, completely unaware that her father had just casually discussed erasing her mother's existence. "What's the difference?" she asked. "Safety means taking the apartment, the security, the new identity I can provide. It means disappearing the way Marcus wants you to, except on your own terms, with enough resources to build a real life somewhere he can't reach you." Victor's voice was measured, laying out options like a lawyer presenting a case. "Justice means standing up, going public, using what I know, what I can prove, to destroy his campaign and ensure he faces consequences for what he's done. And if I choose justice, then you need to understand what you're walking into." Victor leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "Marcus Webb has money, connections, and political protection. The moment you go public, he'll come at you with everything he has. He'll paint you as unstable, vindictive, a woman scorned trying to destroy a good man's career. He'll drag your name through every media outlet that matters. He'll make your life hell in ways you can't imagine." Lena's hands were shaking. She pressed them together, trying to hold steady. "But you can protect me? I can provide security, resources, legal representation. I can ensure the evidence becomes public in ways he can't suppress. I can make sure the story gets told." Victor paused. "What I can't do is shield you from the cost. This kind of fight changes people, Lena. It's not clean or easy, and there are no guarantees we win." "But there's a chance. There's more than a chance." Victor's tone was absolutely certain. Marcus Webb built his career on lies and connections. The moment the truth becomes undeniable, those connections start to reconsider their loyalties. Politicians are pragmatic creatures. They don't stand by sinking ships. Isabella stirred in her bassinet, making small sleeping sounds. Lena watched her daughter's chest rise and fall. This tiny person who had no say in the war her existence had triggered. "If I choose safety," Lena said slowly, "Marcus gets away with everything. He destroys my life, tries to have me killed, and then goes on to become a senator. He gets to make laws, influence policy, present himself as some champion of family values while his own daughter grows up not knowing who he is. Yes. And if I choose justice, I might lose everything anyway. He might destroy my reputation so thoroughly that Isabella grows up with a mother everyone thinks is crazy or vindictive or both." "It's possible," Victor admitted, "though I'd argue that growing up knowing her mother fought for the truth is better than growing up believing she was too afraid to stand." Lena closed her eyes. The smart choice was obvious. Take the safety, disappear, build a quiet life somewhere Marcus's influence didn't reach. Protect Isabella from the ugliness of public battles and media scrutiny. But Lena had spent 7 months being smart, being quiet, being invisible. And it had gotten her evicted, fired, systematically erased from her own life while the man responsible walked free. "I want justice," she said, opening her eyes to meet Victor's gaze. "I want him to face consequences. I want everyone to know what he did." Something that might have been satisfaction crossed Victor's face. "Then we move forward. But I need you to understand. Once we start this, there's no going back. Marcus will know you're not just a problem anymore, you're a threat." "I'm already a threat," Lena said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "The moment Isabella was born, I became evidence he can't bury. At least this way I'm a threat who fights back." Victor stood, pulling out his phone. "Then we need to move quickly. The wellness check he requested will happen within the next few hours. When the officers arrive, you'll be calm, cooperative, and completely prepared. I'll have a lawyer here within 30 minutes. "A lawyer?" Lena's brief surge of courage wavered. "I can't afford—" "You're not paying for anything," Victor said, already dialing. "Consider it part of the investment in making sure the truth comes out." He stepped away, speaking rapid Italian into his phone. Lena stayed on the couch, trying to process the fact that she'd just committed to a war with a man who had the resources to destroy her. No, not destroy her. Marcus had already tried that. What she'd just committed to was refusing to stay destroyed. There was a difference. Victor ended his call and turned back to her. "The lawyer will be here in 20 minutes. Her name is Sarah Chen, and she specializes in family law with a particular focus on parental rights cases. When the police arrive, you'll let her do most of the talking." "Okay." Lena's voice was small. "What do I do until then?" You breathe. You take care of Isabella. You remember that you're not alone in this. Victor's expression softened slightly. And you trust that I've been planning for this moment for longer than you've known I existed. A knock at the door interrupted whatever Lena might have said. One of Victor's security team, a man named James, who'd introduced himself when she'd first arrived, opened it to reveal a woman in her late 30s, wearing a sharp black suit and carrying a leather briefcase. That was fast, Lena said. Sarah was already on standby, Victor said. I told you, Lena, I always have a plan. Sarah Chen moved with the brisk efficiency of someone used to handling crises. She set her briefcase on the coffee table, pulled out a legal pad, and looked at Lena with eyes that were kind but thoroughly professional. Miss Cruz, I understand NYPD will be conducting a wellness check this morning based on a complaint filed by Marcus Webb. Is that correct? Yes. Lena's mouth was dry. He says I'm unstable, a danger to myself and the baby. Do you have any history of mental health issues? Anything that could be used to substantiate that claim? No, I'm not. Lena stumbled over the words, the implication making her feel defensive and small. It's okay, Sarah said gently. I need to know what we're working with. Have you been to any therapy sessions, taken any medications, had any incidents that could be misrepresented? I went to a free counseling session at the clinic when I was 4 months pregnant, Lena admitted. After Marcus refused to acknowledge the baby, I was struggling, and they offered support services. That's actually good, Sarah said, making notes. It shows you were proactive about your mental health, which is the opposite of unstable. Anything else? Lena shook her head. How's Isabella? Any health concerns? Are you feeding her regularly, changing her, providing appropriate care? She's perfect. Lena glanced at the bassinet. She eats every 2 to 3 hours, sleeps well between feedings. The pediatrician said she's completely healthy at her first checkup. Oh, Sarah made more notes. When the officers arrive, you'll show them a clean, safe apartment. You'll demonstrate that Isabella is well cared for. You'll be cooperative but calm. You don't need to explain yourself or justify your choices. You just need to show that there's no basis for the complaint. And if they don't believe me, then I'll remind them that a wellness check is not grounds for removal without evidence of immediate danger or neglect, Sarah said firmly. Marcus Webb can file all the complaints he wants. Without proof, they're just harassment. The knock came 40 minutes later, just as Lena was finishing feeding Isabella again. Sarah answered the door, her entire demeanor shifting into professional advocate mode. 2 uniformed officers stood in the hallway, one older male, one younger female. They looked tired and slightly apologetic, like they'd already figured out this was going to be a waste of everyone's time. Miss Cruz, the older officer said. I'm Officer Martinez. This is Officer Kim. We received a report of concern regarding the welfare of a newborn at this residence. Of course. Sarah gestured them inside. Miss Cruz is happy to cooperate. As you can see, the apartment is clean and safe. The baby is healthy and well cared for. The officers did a perfunctory walkthrough, noting the stocked kitchen, the organized nursery, the generally tidy state of the apartment. Officer Kim asked to see Isabella, and Lena lifted her from the bassinet, demonstrating the easy competence of a mother who knew what she was doing. She's beautiful, Officer Kim said softly. How old? 3 days, Lena said, her voice steadier than she felt. Born at Mount Sinai. Everything went well. Officer Martinez was writing in his notebook. The complaint mentioned concerns about your mental state. Have you been experiencing any difficulties? Depression, anxiety, thoughts of self-harm? I'm tired, Lena said honestly. New mother tired. But I'm coping well. I have support. She glanced at Sarah, then at Victor, who'd remained standing near the kitchen, a silent but unmistakable presence. And the baby's father? Officer Martinez asked. Is he involved? The question hung in the air. Sarah opened her mouth to deflect, but Lena spoke first. No, the father chose not to be involved, but Isabella and I are doing fine without him. Something in her tone must have communicated the truth beneath the polite words. Officer Kim's expression shifted, recognition crossing her face. She'd seen this before, Lena realized. Women abandoned by men who didn't want the responsibility. Well, Officer Martinez said, closing his notebook, I don't see any basis for concern here. Everything appears to be in order. We'll file our report stating the child is safe and well cared for. Thank you, Sarah said smoothly. We appreciate you taking the time to verify Miss Cruz and her daughter's well-being. The officers left. The door closed. Lena stood in the middle of her living room, still holding Isabella, feeling like she'd just survived the first real battle in a war she'd only begun to understand. You did well, Victor said quietly. Lena let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. That was his opening move, wasn't it? Testing to see if he could use official channels to make me look unfit. Yes, Sarah confirmed, packing up her briefcase. And it failed, which means his next move will be more direct. How direct? Victor and Sarah exchanged a look that made Lena's stomach tighten. He'll try to force a meeting, Victor said, either through legal channels or through more personal pressure. He needs to know what you want, what it will take to make you go away quietly. And when I refuse to go away, then he'll escalate. Victor's tone was matter of fact, like he was describing the weather instead of threats to her safety. Which is why I need you to be very careful about where you go and who you trust. No leaving the apartment without security. No answering unknown numbers. No communication with anyone from your previous life without clearing it through me first. The reality of what she'd agreed to settled over Lena like a weight. This was her life now, security details and restricted movement, and constantly looking over her shoulder. But it was also safety, protection. The first time in 7 months she'd had any kind of power in her own story. Okay, she said, I'll be careful. Sarah left after providing Lena with her contact information and strict instructions to call immediately if anything else happened. Victor stayed, checking something on his phone with a frown. What is it? Lena asked, lowering Isabella back into her bassinet. Marcus just arrived at his office building. Based on the timing, he knows the wellness check failed. Victor looked up. He'll be angry, frustrated that his intimidation tactics aren't working. Good, Lena said, surprised by the fierce satisfaction in her own voice. Victor's mouth quirked into something that might have been a smile. You're learning. Learning what? That fear can turn into fuel if you let it. He pocketed his phone. Get some rest, Lena. I have a feeling the next few days are going to require all the strength you can gather. He moved toward the door, but Lena stopped him with a question that had been building since the hospital. Victor, why did you really come to the convenience store that night? You say you've been monitoring Marcus for 4 years, but why show up exactly when I went into labor? Why not sooner? Why not later? Victor turned back, his dark eyes unreadable. Because I needed to know what kind of person you were. Whether you'd take the money and run, or whether you'd fight even when fighting seemed impossible. And you knew I'd go into labor that night? No. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. That was coincidence, or fate, or whatever you want to call it when the universe decides to make things more complicated than they need to be. You could have just introduced yourself, offered help without all the drama. I could have, Victor agreed, but then you wouldn't have seen me as someone who shows up when it matters. You would have seen me as just another man offering things with invisible strings attached. He was right, Lena realized. If he'd approached her before Isabella's birth, she would have been suspicious, terrified, certain there was a catch she couldn't see. Instead, he'd shown up in her darkest moment and simply stayed. Thank you, she said quietly, for showing up, for staying, for all of this. Victor nodded once, a gesture that conveyed more than words. Then he was gone, leaving Lena alone with her sleeping daughter and thoughts that wouldn't stop racing. She looked around the apartment, at the safety Victor had provided, at the comfortable furniture and well-stocked nursery, at the life she'd been given in exchange for agreeing to fight instead of flee. And she wondered, not for the first time and certainly not for the last, what price would eventually come due for accepting help from a man who operated in shadows and spoke about justice like it was a commodity that could be bought and sold. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, she had a daughter to feed, a war to prepare for, and the first real taste of hope she'd felt in 7 months. It would have to be enough. Isabella was 2 weeks old when Victor finally told Lena the whole truth. They sat in the living room of the apartment he'd provided, a space so far removed from her efficiency above the laundromat that Lena still sometimes woke up disoriented, forgetting where she was. Isabella nursed contentedly, her small hand resting against Lena's chest, oblivious to the tension crackling through the room like static electricity. Victor stood by the windows, his silhouette dark against the city lights. He'd been quiet since arriving 20 minutes ago, his usual controlled demeanor showing cracks that made Lena's stomach tighten with apprehension. "There's something you need to understand," he said finally, not turning around. "About why I'm really helping you." Lena adjusted Isabella's position, buying herself time. "You told me already. Marcus destroyed someone you cared about. You want justice." "That's part of it." Victor turned, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "But not all of it." "Then tell me the rest." He crossed to the couch, sat down with careful precision, maintaining enough distance to be respectful, but close enough that she could see the old scar near his left eye, the gray threading through his dark hair at the temples. "The man Marcus Webb framed 4 years ago," Victor said quietly, "was my brother." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything Lena thought she understood. "Your brother," she repeated. "Antonio Romano. 3 years younger than me. Good man. Better man than I ever was." Victor's hands tightened briefly before he forced them to relax. He worked at Meridian Capital as a mid-level manager. Straight salary, nothing fancy. He had a wife, Sophia, and 2 daughters. He was everything I wasn't, legitimate, honest, building a life the right way. Isabella had fallen asleep, milk-drunk and peaceful. Lena carefully shifted her to her shoulder, patting her back gently while her mind raced. What happened to him? "Marcus Webb found evidence of my operation." Victor's voice remained steady, but something dark flickered in his eyes. "Money moving through Meridian's real estate division. Perfectly hidden, completely untraceable. Except Marcus was smarter than anyone gave him credit for. He could have reported it, started an investigation that would have eventually led back to me. But he didn't." No. "He saw an opportunity." Victor stood, needing to move. He altered the audit trail to point directly at Antonio. Made it look like my brother had discovered the operation and was participating in it for personal profit. Then he went to the board, played the hero whistleblower, and watched my brother get arrested while he negotiated himself a promotion and immunity from prosecution. Lena felt sick. "Your brother went to prison for your crimes." "Yes." Usually the word was flat, factual, carrying more weight than any emotional outburst could. 18 months in a federal facility while his wife struggled to keep their house, while his daughters grew up visiting him in a prison visiting room, while Marcus Webb built a political career on the reputation of being the principled analyst who exposed corruption. "Did Antonio know?" Lena asked softly. "About your operation?" "No." Victor's laugh was bitter. "That was the cruelest part. Antonio had spent his whole adult life trying to distance himself from the family business, from me, from everything our father built. He wanted legitimacy. He wanted his daughters to grow up proud of what he did for a living, and Marcus Webb destroyed that with fabricated evidence and a smile." Isabella stirred against Lena's shoulder, making small sounds in her sleep. Lena rubbed her back automatically, her mind processing the implications of what Victor was telling her. "You got him out," she said. "You said his conviction was overturned." "I spent 3 years building an airtight case, finding the real evidence, documenting every transaction Marcus had altered. I couldn't use any of it directly. It would have exposed my operation and put Antonio right back in danger. So I had to be patient, had to wait for the right moment, the right angle." Victor's jaw tightened. "And I had to watch my brother lose everything while I waited." "Is he—" Lena hesitated. "Is Antonio okay now?" "He's alive. He's free. His record is cleared." Victor's expression hardened. "But Sophia left him 6 months into his sentence. Took the girls and moved across the country, changed their names. Antonio hasn't seen his daughters in 3 years. He works construction now, lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, and doesn't talk to me unless he absolutely has to." The pain in those words was carefully controlled but unmistakable. Lena shifted Isabella to her other shoulder, giving herself time to think. "So, when you found out about me," she said slowly, "about Marcus abandoning his child, I saw an opportunity for justice that didn't exist 3 years ago." Victor met her eyes directly. "Marcus Webb is launching a Senate campaign. He's engaged to a federal judge's daughter. He's built an entire public image on being principled, ethical, a champion of accountability in finance and government. And I'm the lie that destroys all of it. You're the truth, Victor corrected. You and Isabella. Undeniable biological proof that the man claiming to represent family values abandoned his own child and tried to erase the mother when she wouldn't quietly disappear. Lena's arms tightened protectively around Isabella. You want to use us, to expose him. I want to give you a choice. Victor's voice was firm. The same choice Antonio never had. You can walk away. Take Isabella, move somewhere Marcus Webb will never find you. I'll make sure you have enough money to start over, to build a life where you're safe and invisible. Or you stand with me. You let me protect you while we gather irrefutable evidence. And when the time is right, we put the truth in front of every news camera, every voter, every person who thinks Marcus Webb is someone worth trusting with power. The apartment was silent except for Isabella's soft breathing and the distant sounds of the city. Lena stood, needing to move, needing to think. She walked to the windows, looking out at the lights spreading to the horizon. What happens to me if I do this? She asked. What happens to Isabella? I won't lie to you, Lena. It won't be easy. Marcus has resources, connections, lawyers who'll try to destroy your credibility. They'll dig into every mistake you've ever made, every vulnerability they can exploit. I don't have any money. I don't have connections or lawyers or... You'll have me. Victor moved to stand beside her, his reflection visible in the glass. My resources, my protection, my commitment to seeing this through to the end. Lena turned to face him. Why? And don't tell me it's just about your brother. You could destroy Marcus Webb 100 different ways. Why does it have to be through me? Victor was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face. Because what Marcus did to you is what he did to Antonio, he said finally. He looked at someone powerless and decided their life was worth less than his ambition. He erased you because he could, because men like him believe they're entitled to use people and discard them without consequences. His voice dropped. And because that baby in your arms deserves to know her father's true character, not the carefully constructed lie he sells to the public. What about what I deserve? The question came out sharper than Lena intended. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be part of your revenge against Marcus Webb. No, Victor agreed. You asked to stop being invisible. You asked for your daughter to grow up knowing the truth. Those were your words, Lena. In the car, on the way to the hospital. She had said that. She remembered the moment clearly, contractions ripping through her body, terror making her voice shake, and the desperate wish that Isabella would grow up knowing her worth even if her father never acknowledged her existence. If I do this, Lena said slowly, if I stand with you and expose Marcus, what's the endgame? What happens when it's over? Marcus Webb's career ends, his engagement probably ends, his reputation definitely ends. Victor's expression was hard. He loses everything he valued more than his own child, and you and Isabella get to live your lives without looking over your shoulders, without wondering when he'll decide you're too much of a risk to leave alive. The casual way he said that last part made Lena's blood run cold. You really think he'd... I think men who've already destroyed lives to protect their interests don't suddenly develop a conscience when the stakes get higher. Victor's voice was gentle but firm. Marcus Webb spent 7 months systematically dismantling your ability to survive. That wasn't an accident. That was a warning of what he's capable of when someone threatens his carefully constructed future. Isabella shifted in Lena's arms, her small face scrunching up before relaxing again into sleep. So tiny, so completely dependent on the choices Lena made right now. I need time, Lena said, to think about this. Of course, Victor stepped back, giving her space. But Lena, you should know that whether you choose to fight or disappear, Marcus already knows about Isabella. He has people watching the hospitals, tracking birth records. It's only a matter of time before he makes a move. Fear spiked through her chest. What kind of move? That depends on how threatened he feels. At minimum, he'll try to buy your silence with money and legal threats. At worst, Victor didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. How long do I have before I need to decide? Days, maybe a week. Victor pulled out his phone, checked something, then met her eyes again. Marcus is holding a campaign fundraiser this Friday. Major donors, political connections, media coverage. It's the kind of event where image is everything. If you're going to act, that's when you'd have maximum impact. And if I'm not ready by Friday, then we wait for the next opportunity. But Lena, Victor's expression softened slightly. Every day you wait is another day you're vulnerable. Another day Marcus has to plan, to prepare, to decide how to handle the problem you represent. The problem. That's what she'd been to Marcus from the moment she'd told him about the pregnancy. Not a person, not the mother of his child, just a problem to be solved. I'll think about it, Lena said firmly, but I need you to leave now. I need to be alone with my daughter. Victor nodded, respecting the boundary. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I understand if you choose safety over justice. No one would blame you for protecting Isabella first. Except me, Lena whispered. I'd blame me. Something like respect flickered in Victor's eyes. My number's on the counter. Call me when you decide. Whatever you choose, I'll honor it. Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that made the apartment feel suddenly too large, too quiet. Lena carried Isabella to the nursery, a room she still couldn't quite believe existed, with its crib and changing table and soft toys she'd never be able to afford on her own. She laid her daughter down carefully, watching her sleep with the particular intensity of new mothers who still couldn't quite believe this tiny person was real. What do I do, baby girl? She whispered. How do I choose between keeping you safe and teaching you that truth matters? Isabella, predictably, had no answers. Lena spent the next 3 days in a fog of indecision. She fed Isabella, changed her, walked endless circles around the apartment while her daughter slept against her chest. She thought about Marcus Webb and his Senate campaign, about Victor Romano and his patient, calculated revenge, about Antonio and his daughters, who didn't even know he existed anymore. Mostly, she thought about invisibility. She'd spent 7 months becoming a ghost, working jobs that paid cash under the table, living in places that didn't require background checks, existing in the margins where people like Marcus Webb never had to see the consequences of their choices. And she'd hated every second of it, not because the work was hard or the apartments were terrible, though both were true, but because every day of invisibility felt like confirmation that Marcus had been right, that she was disposable, that her existence only mattered when it was convenient for powerful men. On the third day, Lena stood at the windows again, Isabella asleep in the bassinet behind her, and made her decision. She called Victor. I'll do it, she said when he answered. I'll stand with you. I'll expose Marcus Webb for exactly what he is. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Victor spoke, his voice carried something that might have been relief. You're sure? No, Lena admitted. I'm terrified, but I'm more terrified of spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, teaching my daughter that hiding is safer than standing up for what's right. Then we start now, Victor said. I'm sending a car. We have work to do. The car arrived 20 minutes later. Lena bundled Isabella into the infant carrier she still didn't quite trust herself to install correctly, grabbed the diaper bag, and took a deep breath before stepping into the elevator. No going back now. Victor was waiting in the SUV, along with a woman Lena had never seen before. She was maybe 50, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that seemed to catalog everything in a single glance. Lena, this is Catherine Morrison, Victor said as the car pulled into traffic. She's a lawyer. One of the best. Catherine extended her hand, her grip firm and professional. Ms. Cruz, I understand you're ready to pursue paternity establishment and child support for Marcus Webb. Among other things, Lena said, settling Isabella's carrier on the seat beside her. Among other things, Catherine agreed, the hint of a smile touching her lips. Let's start with the basics. Did Marcus Webb ever acknowledge the pregnancy in writing? Texts? Emails? Anything? Lena pulled out her phone, the cheap prepaid she'd been using since Marcus had blacklisted her. A few texts, before he decided I was a problem. Catherine took the phone, scrolling through the messages with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen worse. Her expression remained neutral, but something tightened around her eyes. These are good, she said finally. Especially this one where he acknowledges the relationship and timeline. And this one, she paused, reading, where he explicitly threatens your employment if you continue to make this difficult. That's going to be very useful. For what? Lena asked. For establishing a pattern of coercion and intimidation. for demonstrating that Marcus Webb wasn't just an absent father, but an actively destructive one. Catherine handed back the phone. Miss Cruz, I need you to understand what you're about to face. Marcus Webb has resources. He'll hire lawyers who specialize in destroying credibility. They'll bring up every mistake you've ever made, every questionable choice, every vulnerability. I know. Do you? Catherine's gaze was sharp. Because they'll make you prove things you shouldn't have to prove. They'll question your character, your motivations, your fitness as a mother. They'll try to paint you as someone who's trying to extort a successful man using a child as leverage. Lena felt her jaw tighten. Let them try. They'll also offer you money, Victor added quietly. A lot of money. Enough to disappear, to give Isabella everything she needs, to never worry about rent or food or medical care again. All you have to do is sign an NDA and agree that Marcus isn't the father. I'm not taking his money. Even if it means Isabella grows up without the resources she deserves? The question hit harder than Lena expected. She looked down at her daughter, sleeping peacefully in her carrier, completely unaware of the war being waged around her existence. Isabella deserves the truth more than she deserves blood money, Lena said firmly. She deserves to know her father is the kind of man who abandons his responsibilities. Not because I told her, but because he proved it through his actions. That's worth more than any settlement Marcus Webb could offer. Catherine and Victor exchanged a look that Lena couldn't quite read. All right, Catherine said. Then here's what happens next. We file for paternity establishment through the courts. We request DNA testing. We document every attempt Marcus has made to silence you, intimidate you, or interfere with your ability to care for Isabella. And then we wait for him to respond. He'll fight it, of course. Claim the test isn't necessary, that you're lying about the relationship, that there's no proof he's the father. His lawyers will try every procedural trick to delay and obstruct. But eventually he'll have to take the test, Lena said. Eventually, Catherine confirmed. The court can order it, and when it comes back positive, which we both know it will, Marcus Webb will have a choice. Acknowledge Isabella publicly and face the political consequences, or continue denying her and face perjury charges. The car pulled up outside a building Lena didn't recognize. Victor opened the door, offering his hand to help her out. Where are we? She asked. My lawyer's office, he said. We're going to spend the next few hours documenting everything. Every interaction you had with Marcus, every threat, every attempt to make you disappear. Catherine needs it all. The next 4 hours were brutal. Lena sat in a conference room that probably cost more per hour than her old apartment cost per month, and told her story to a court reporter who typed every word with mechanical precision. She described meeting Marcus at Meridian Capital, the professional relationship that had shifted into something personal, the nights in his penthouse where he'd made promises he never intended to keep. She described the moment she'd told him about the pregnancy, the cold calculation in his eyes as he'd decided she was disposable. She described the systematic destruction of her life, the job she'd lost, the apartments she couldn't rent, the background checks that somehow always came back with red flags that didn't exist. Did Marcus ever explicitly threaten you? Catherine asked. Lena thought back to that final meeting in his office, the way he'd adjusted his tie in the window's reflection without bothering to look at her. He said I needed to understand what complications actually look like, she said quietly. He said he had plans, a future wife, a campaign. He said I should take the settlement and disappear because the alternative would be worse. And did you interpret that as a threat? I interpreted it as a promise. Catherine made notes in her legal pad, her expression giving nothing away. Did anyone else hear him say this? No, we were alone in his office. Did he ever put any of these threats in writing? Lena shook her head. Marcus is too smart for that. Everything was verbal, deniable. That's how men like him operate, isn't it? They make sure there's never proof. Usually, Victor said from his position by the window. But Marcus made one mistake. He couldn't resist using his connections to destroy you systematically. Every eviction notice, every failed background check, every job you lost, there's a trail. It's subtle, but it's there. You found it? I found enough. Victor's smile was sharp. Enough to show a pattern. Enough to demonstrate that a woman with no criminal record, no history of problems, suddenly couldn't rent an apartment or keep a job the moment she became inconvenient to Marcus Webb. Any reasonable person looking at the timeline would see the connection. Catherine glanced at her watch. It's almost 6. We should break for today. Lena, you need to rest. Tomorrow we file the paperwork. How long until Marcus knows? Lena asked. He'll be served within 24 hours, Catherine said. After that, things will move fast. His lawyers will file a response, probably demand their own DNA test, try to question Isabella's paternity through any angle they can find. Let them, Lena said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. Let them question whatever they want. The truth is the truth. Victor drove her home himself, dismissing his usual driver. Isabella slept through the ride, exhausted from a day of being passed between unfamiliar hands. Lena held her carrier carefully, watching the city lights blur past the windows. Are you okay? Victor asked quietly. I don't know, Lena admitted. I keep thinking about what Catherine said. About them destroying my credibility, questioning my fitness as a mother. They can question all they want. The facts don't change. Facts don't always matter to people with enough money and power. Victor was silent for a moment. Antonio used to say that. Before his trial. He kept saying the truth would matter, that the facts would speak for themselves. And then he got 18 months in prison anyway. The pain in his voice made Lena's chest ache. I'm sorry for what happened to your brother. He made his choice to distance himself from the family business. I respected that. Victor's hands tightened on the steering wheel. But I should have protected him better, should have seen what Marcus was doing before it was too late. You couldn't have known. I should have. The words were quiet but fierce. And I won't make that mistake again. Not with you. Not with Isabella. They pulled up outside her building. Victor came around to help with the carrier, his movements careful and practiced in a way that suggested this wasn't his first time handling an infant. Do you have children? Lena asked as they rode the elevator up. Something flickered across his face. No, but Antonio's daughters, before everything fell apart, I used to see them regularly. I was the uncle who showed up with expensive presents and let them stay up past bedtime. Do you still see them? No. The word was final, carrying years of loss. Sophia made sure of that when she left. She didn't want her daughters anywhere near the family that had destroyed their father's life, even though it was my operation that caused it, not Antonio's. They reached her apartment. Victor set the carrier down carefully while Lena unlocked the door. Thank you, she said. For today, for Catherine, for all of this. Don't thank me yet. Victor's expression was serious. Tomorrow, when Marcus gets served, things will get harder. He'll lash out. He'll try to intimidate you, to make you regret this choice. I already regret it, Lena said honestly, but I'm doing it anyway. Something like respect flickered in Victor's eyes. That's the difference between you and Marcus Webb. You understand that doing the right thing isn't the same as doing the easy thing. After he left, Lena fed Isabella, changed her, rocked her back to sleep. She stood in the nursery for a long time, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall, marveling at how something so small had the power to change everything. Tomorrow, Marcus would know. Tomorrow, the war would begin in earnest. But tonight, Lena let herself have this moment, this quiet, peaceful moment where she was just a mother watching her daughter sleep, storing up strength for the battles ahead. I'm going to protect you, she whispered to Isabella. Not by hiding, not by disappearing, but by standing up and making sure everyone knows exactly who your father is and what he chose. You deserve that truth, baby girl. You deserve to grow up knowing you were worth fighting for. Isabella slept on, peaceful and innocent, while her mother made promises that would reshape both their futures in ways neither of them could yet imagine. Marcus Webb was served with paternity papers at 9:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning, in front of 3 senior partners at his law firm and a journalist who'd been invited to interview him about campaign finance reform. Lena knew the exact moment it happened because her phone started ringing at 9:51. She ignored the first call, and the second. By the 5th, Isabella was crying from the noise, and Lena finally answered with shaking hands. You made a serious mistake. Marcus's voice was cold, controlled, nothing like the warm tone he'd used during those 8 months when she'd still believed his promises. A very serious mistake, Lena. She should have hung up. Catherine had been explicit about not engaging with Marcus directly, but hearing his voice again after all these months unleashed something sharp and bitter in her chest. "The only mistake I made was trusting you," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I'm fixing that now." "You think dragging me through court is fixing anything? You think embarrassing me publicly is going to get you what you want? I want Isabella to know her father. I want you to acknowledge what you did." Marcus laughed, the sound devoid of any warmth. "What I did? I offered you a generous settlement. I offered you a clean break, a fresh start. You could have taken the money and disappeared. Instead, you chose this." "You tried to erase me," Lena said, her grip tightening on the phone. "You tried to make me disappear because acknowledging your daughter was inconvenient for your career. That's what you did, Marcus. I protected my future. I protected my family's reputation. You were a mistake, Lena. A momentary lapse in judgment that I tried to handle discreetly." The casual cruelty of it took her breath away. Isabella had stopped crying, was watching Lena with those dark, serious eyes that seemed too knowing for a 3-week-old baby. "She's not a mistake," Lena whispered. "She's your daughter. She's a problem I'm going to solve." Marcus's voice dropped, taking on an edge that made Lena's blood run cold. "You want to play this game? Fine. Let's play. But you need to understand something. I have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers who will bury you in motions and delays until you can't afford to keep fighting. Investigators who will dig into every corner of your pathetic life until they find something to discredit you. Then let them dig. I have nothing to hide." "Everyone has something to hide, Lena. Everyone." He paused, and she could hear papers rustling on his end. "How's that apartment you're living in? Nice place. Way above your pay grade. Makes a person wonder how you're affording it. Makes a person wonder what kind of arrangement you have with the man who's paying for it." The implication hit like a slap. "Victor Romano is helping me because you destroyed my life." Victor Romano is a criminal, a known associate of organized crime who's been under federal investigation for years. And now you're living in his apartment, accepting his money, letting him play white knight. Marcus's voice turned silky with malice. "How do you think that's going to look to a family court judge? A new mother shacking up with a mobster, using her baby to extort child support from a respected financial analyst? I'm not shacking up with anyone, and I'm not extorting. Prove it, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you found yourself a sugar daddy with a grudge against me, and you're both using an innocent child as leverage in whatever vendetta he's nursing." Lena's hand trembled. She'd known Marcus would fight dirty, but hearing the narrative he planned to spin made her feel sick. "The DNA test will prove she's yours," she said. "Everything else is just noise. DNA proves biology, not intent. It doesn't prove I owe you anything beyond basic child support. It doesn't prove you're a fit mother. It doesn't prove—" "I'm done listening to you," Lena cut him off, her voice shaking with anger. "Save it for your lawyers, Marcus, because mine are very interested in hearing about how you systematically destroyed my ability to work, to find housing, to survive. They're very interested in the pattern of intimidation and coercion that started the day I told you I was pregnant. You can't prove any of that." "Can I?" Lena thought about Victor's quiet confidence, the evidence he claimed to have gathered. "I guess we'll find out." She hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Isabella started fussing again, picking up on her mother's distress with the uncanny sensitivity of infants. "It's okay, baby," Lena murmured, lifting her daughter from the bassinet. "It's okay. We're okay." But she didn't feel okay. She felt terrified and exposed and suddenly very aware that Marcus was right about one thing. Accepting help from Victor did make her vulnerable to exactly the kind of accusations Marcus had just made. Her phone rang again. Catherine this time. "I just got a very aggressive call from Marcus Webb's legal team," the lawyer said without preamble. "They're threatening to file a countersuit claiming harassment, defamation, and attempted extortion." Lena's stomach dropped. "Can they do that?" "They can file anything they want. Whether it'll hold up is another matter." Catherine's voice remained calm, professional. "Lena, I need you to tell me the truth. Is there anything in your relationship with Victor Romano that could be misconstrued as romantic or financial dependency beyond what we've already discussed?" "No. He's helping me because Marcus destroyed his brother's life, because he wants justice. Justice and revenge look very similar from the outside, Catherine said bluntly, and Marcus's lawyers are going to paint this as the latter. They're already drafting a narrative where Victor is the puppet master and you're the convenient weapon he's using to destroy a political rival. That's not what's happening. I believe you, but belief isn't evidence. We need to be strategic here. Papers rustled on Catherine's end. First, we document everything. Every interaction with Victor is strictly professional, strictly about the case. No more private car rides, no more personal visits to your apartment. Everything goes through me. The restriction felt like a cage closing around her, but Lena understood the necessity. Okay. Second, we accelerate the DNA testing. Get it done, get the results, establish paternity before Marcus has time to muddy the waters with accusations about your character. How long will that take? If we push, we can have it done in a week. Results within 10 days. Catherine paused. But Lena, you need to understand, even when the DNA proves Marcus is Isabella's father, that's just the beginning. He's going to fight child support. He's going to argue for minimal involvement, and he's going to do everything in his power to make sure this doesn't become public knowledge. What if I want it public? The words came out before Lena fully thought them through. What if I want everyone to know exactly who Marcus Webb is? Catherine was quiet for a long moment. That's a decision you need to make carefully. Going public means media attention. It means cameras, questions, scrutiny of every aspect of your life. It means Isabella's parentage becomes a news story instead of a private family matter. Marcus made it a news story the moment he built a political career on being principled and ethical while abandoning his own child. True, but there's a difference between moral high ground and strategic advantage. If we go public too soon, Marcus's team will control the narrative. They'll paint you as an opportunist trying to damage a good man's reputation. And if we wait until we have irrefutable proof, DNA results, documentation of his intimidation tactics, evidence of his attempts to silence you. Then we don't just have a story, we have a scandal that Marcus can't spin his way out of. Lena looked down at Isabella, who'd fallen asleep against her shoulder, tiny fingers curled into a fist against Lena's collarbone. How long do we wait? Until the Friday fundraiser, Catherine said. The one Victor mentioned. Major donors, media coverage, the perfect stage for Marcus to play the devoted family man with his judge's daughter on his arm. That's when we hit him with the DNA results and the paternity filing. That's when the truth does maximum damage. That's 8 days away. 8 days for us to prepare. 8 days for Marcus to get comfortable thinking he's won. Catherine's voice hardened with something that might have been satisfaction. 8 days for him to stand in front of cameras and talk about family values while refusing to acknowledge his own daughter. The plan was ruthless, calculated, exactly the kind of thing Lena had never imagined herself being part of. But the alternative was letting Marcus control the narrative, letting him erase Isabella's existence while building a political career on lies. Okay, she said. We wait, we prepare, and then we make sure everyone knows the truth. The next week crawled by with agonizing slowness. Lena spent her days taking care of Isabella, trying not to think about Marcus's threats or the upcoming confrontation. Catherine scheduled the DNA test for that Friday, a simple cheek swab that took less than 5 minutes but felt like signing a declaration of war. Marcus didn't show up himself, of course. He sent a lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, who treated the whole thing like a tedious inconvenience. My client maintains that this test is unnecessary and that Miss Cruz is attempting to manufacture a relationship that never existed, the lawyer said primly while the technician swabbed Isabella's cheek. Then your client has nothing to worry about, Catherine replied coolly. If Marcus Webb isn't the father, the test will prove it, and this whole matter goes away. The lawyer's expression suggested he knew exactly how that test was going to come back. The results were promised within 7 days. The fundraiser was scheduled for Friday night. Everything was converging toward a single point, a moment when truth and consequence would collide in front of witnesses who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Victor called twice during that week, both times with updates filtered through Catherine. He'd hired a publicist, someone who specialized in crisis management and knew how to control a media narrative. He'd compiled documentation of every eviction notice, every failed background check, every coincidental obstacle that had appeared in Lena's life after she'd refused Marcus's settlement. He's building a case, Catherine explained during one of their daily check-ins. Not just for family court, but for public opinion. When this goes live, Victor wants to make sure there's no ambiguity about who the villain is. I don't want to destroy Marcus, Lena said, surprising herself with the truth of it. I just want him to acknowledge Isabella. I want him to take responsibility. Sometimes those things are the same thing, Catherine said gently. Sometimes the only way to force accountability is to make the cost of denial higher than the cost of admission. On Thursday night, 24 hours before the fundraiser, the DNA results came back. Catherine called at 11 p.m., her voice tight with controlled emotion. It's a match. 99.97% probability of paternity. Marcus Webb is Isabella's biological father. Lena had known it, of course, had never doubted it, but hearing the scientific confirmation made something in her chest crack open. What happens now, Joyce? She asked, looking down at Isabella asleep in her crib. Now we file an amended petition with the court, including the DNA results. We officially establish paternity and request child support based on Marcus's income. Catherine paused. And tomorrow night, at exactly 8 p.m., when Marcus Webb is standing in front of every major donor and media outlet in the city, we release everything to the press. Everything? The DNA results, the timeline of your relationship, documentation of his threats and intimidation, the fact that he's refused to acknowledge his daughter while campaigning on family values. Catherine's voice carried grim satisfaction. By the time the news cycle finishes with him, Marcus Webb's Senate campaign will be over. Lena closed her eyes, trying to imagine it. Marcus's face when the news broke, his fiancée's reaction, the donors who'd gathered to celebrate his political future, watching it implode in real time. Victor wants to know if you'll be there, Catherine added. At the fundraiser, not inside, obviously, but nearby. He says you deserve to see it happen. I don't know if I can. Isabella, bring her. Let Marcus see exactly what he's been trying to erase. Let everyone see the child he abandoned. Catherine's tone softened slightly. Or stay home. Watch it on the news. Either way, justice is coming, Lena. You just need to decide if you want to witness it. Lena spent all of Friday morning trying to decide. She fed Isabella, changed her, walked circles around the apartment while her daughter dozed against her chest. The fundraiser started at 7. The press release was scheduled for 8. In 9 hours, everything would change. At noon, Victor showed up at her door. I know Catherine said no personal visits, he said when Lena answered, but I needed to see you before tonight, to make sure you're ready for what's about to happen. Lena stepped aside to let him in. He looked different somehow, harder, more focused, like a weapon being sharpened for a specific purpose. I'm ready, she said, though she wasn't sure that was true. Victor moved to the windows, the same position he always took when he needed to think. 4 years I've been waiting for this moment. 4 years of watching Marcus Webb build a career on the reputation he stole from my brother. And now, finally, there's going to be consequences. This isn't just about your brother anymore, Lena said quietly. This is about Isabella, about making sure she grows up knowing her father couldn't hide from the truth. Can I ask you something? Victor turned to face her. If Marcus called right now and offered you everything, full acknowledgement of Isabella, generous child support, public acceptance of his responsibility, but only if you agreed not to go public with the story tonight, would you take it? Lena looked down at Isabella, awake now, and watching her with those serious dark eyes. A month ago I would have, she admitted. A month ago, I just wanted Isabella to be safe and acknowledged. I didn't care about revenge or justice or making Marcus pay. And now? Now I know that men like Marcus don't change unless they're forced to. Now I know that if I let him control this narrative, he'll find a way to minimize his responsibility, to make Isabella feel like a mistake he was generous enough to acknowledge. Lena met Victor's eyes. So no, I wouldn't take that deal. Because Isabella deserves better than a father who only admits she exists because he was cornered into it. Something like pride flickered across Victor's face. Then you should be there tonight. You should see the moment when Marcus Webb realizes he can't buy or intimidate his way out of consequences. I'll be there, Lena decided. We'll both be there. The fundraiser was being held at the Meridian Hotel, a historic building in Midtown with the kind of old money elegance that Marcus Webb had spent his entire career trying to access. Victor arranged for Lena to wait in a suite on the 8th floor, directly above the ballroom where Marcus would be making his speech. She arrived at 7:30, Isabella bundled against the October cold, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Victor met her in the lobby, his hand on her elbow as he guided her past doormen who pretended not to see them. "The press release goes out at 8, he said as they rode the elevator up. "Catherine's team is ready. The DNA results, the documentation, everything. The major news outlets already have the story. They're just waiting for confirmation before they run it. And Marcus has no idea? Marcus thinks he's untouchable." Victor's smile was sharp as a blade. "He's about to learn differently." The suite had a small television tuned to a local news channel that was covering the fundraiser. Lena could see Marcus on screen, shaking hands with donors. His fiancée, a polished woman with perfect hair and a diplomatic smile, on his arm. He looked confident, successful, every inch the rising political star. Lena settled into a chair by the window, Isabella nursing quietly while they waited. 8 p.m. approached with agonizing slowness. On the television, Marcus moved to the podium, preparing to give his speech about ethics in government, about the importance of accountability in public service. The irony was almost too much to bear. "Good evening," Marcus began, his voice carrying that warm, trustworthy tone he'd perfected. "Thank you all for being here tonight, for believing in a future where our leaders are held to the highest standards of integrity and honesty." Lena's phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. "Story is live, check the news sites." On her laptop, the headlines were already appearing. Senate candidate Marcus Webb named in paternity suit. DNA confirms Webb fathered child with former assistant. Family values candidate accused of abandoning daughter. On the television, Marcus was still talking, unaware that his campaign was imploding in real time. "We need leaders who understand that accountability isn't just a talking point. It's a commitment to doing the right thing even when it's difficult, even when it costs us personally." A commotion started at the back of the ballroom. Someone was checking their phone, showing it to the person next to them. The murmur spread like ripples in water. Marcus faltered mid-sentence, his confident smile flickering. His campaign manager pushed through the crowd, phone in hand, face ashen. Lena watched as the man whispered something in Marcus's ear, watched the color drain from Marcus's face, watched the moment he understood that everything he'd built was crashing down around him. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Donors pulled back, distancing themselves with the practiced efficiency of people who knew when to abandon a sinking ship. Marcus's fiancée stood frozen, her perfect composure cracking as she processed what was happening. "Mr. Webb, is it true you fathered a child with your former assistant?" "Mr. Webb, did you attempt to intimidate the mother into silence?" "Mr. Webb, how do you reconcile abandoning your daughter with your campaign's focus on family values?" Marcus gripped the podium, his knuckles white. For a moment, Lena thought he might try to deny it, to spin some version of events that made him the victim. Instead, he looked directly at the cameras and said, "No comment," before walking off the stage. The news coverage switched to anchors in the studio, already analyzing the implications. Political experts weighed in on whether Marcus's campaign could survive this revelation. Legal analysts discussed the paternity suit, the DNA evidence, the potential child support obligations. Lena's phone rang. "Marcus, of course." She answered, her hand steady this time. "You destroyed me." His voice was raw, stripped of its usual control. "You and your criminal boyfriend destroyed everything I worked for." "No, Marcus, you destroyed yourself the moment you decided Isabella didn't deserve to exist." Lena's voice was calm, certain. "I just made sure everyone knew the truth. This isn't over. I'll fight this. I'll appeal the DNA results. You'll what? Deny your own daughter on national television? That's gone so well for you tonight." Lena looked down at Isabella, who'd finished nursing and was gazing up at her with complete trust. "The test is irrefutable. The evidence of your intimidation is documented. Your campaign is over, Marcus. The only question now is whether you're going to keep fighting or finally do the right thing." "The right thing?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "You want to talk to me about doing the right thing? You ambushed me at a fundraiser. You destroyed my reputation, my career, my relationship. I want you to acknowledge your daughter, Lena cut him off. That's all I've ever wanted. Acknowledge her, support her, be a father to her, even if it's just financially. The line was silent for a long moment. I'll have my lawyer contact Catherine, Marcus said finally, his voice dead. We'll work out child support, visitation, whatever the court requires. And publicly? Will you acknowledge Isabella publicly? Another long pause. What choice do I have? The whole world knows now, thanks to you. Thanks to you, Lena corrected. I didn't make you abandon your child, Marcus. I didn't make you threaten me or try to erase my existence. I just made sure your choices had consequences. That's what accountability looks like. She hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking with adrenaline and something that felt like victory but tasted more complex. Victor appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. It's done. Marcus just issued a statement through his campaign acknowledging paternity and withdrawing from the Senate race. That was fast. His advisors saw the writing on the wall. There's no spinning this, no recovering from it. Victor moved closer, looking down at Isabella with an expression that had softened since that first night in the hospital. She's going to grow up knowing her father was forced to acknowledge her. Is that the outcome you wanted? Lena thought about it carefully. No. What I wanted was for Marcus to choose us willingly, to want to be part of Isabella's life because she mattered to him. But that was never going to happen. So I'll settle for him being forced to do the right thing, even if his reasons are wrong. That's more wisdom than most people ever achieve. It's not wisdom, it's acceptance. Lena stood, adjusting Isabella in her arms. I accept that Marcus will never be the father I wanted for my daughter, but I won't accept him erasing her existence or teaching her that powerful men can escape consequences for their choices. Victor's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then showed Lena the screen. A news alert. Webb's fiancé calls off engagement, cites fundamental dishonesty. She lasted longer than I expected, Victor said. She probably knew, Lena said quietly. Women always know when men are lying. We just don't always have the power to do anything about it. They stood together at the window, watching the city lights spread to the horizon. Below, news vans were probably swarming the Meridian Hotel, reporters cataloging the destruction of Marcus Webb's political dreams. What happens now? Lena asked. Now that it's over? It's not over, Victor said. There's still court proceedings, child support negotiations, custody arrangements. Marcus will fight to minimize his involvement, to keep Isabella at arm's length while fulfilling his legal obligations. But publicly, it's over. Everyone knows the truth. Everyone knows part of the truth. Victor turned to face her. They know Marcus abandoned his child. They don't know about the systematic intimidation, the threats, the way he tried to destroy you for refusing to disappear. That story is still yours to tell if you want to. Lena looked down at Isabella, who'd fallen asleep again, peaceful and unaware of the war that had been waged around her existence. Maybe someday, she said, when Isabella's old enough to understand, when she asks about her father and why he's not part of our lives, then I'll tell her the whole truth, not to make her hate him, but so she understands that his absence was his choice, not her fault. That's more grace than he deserves. It's not for him. It's for her. Lena's voice was firm. Isabella deserves to grow up knowing the truth without being poisoned by bitterness. She deserves better than carrying her father's failures as her own burden. Victor studied her for a long moment, something like respect deepening in his dark eyes. You're stronger than I gave you credit for, stronger than Marcus ever deserved. I'm not strong. I'm just a mother protecting her daughter the only way I know how. Lena adjusted Isabella's blanket, tucking it more securely around her small form. Thank you, Victor, for everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For giving me the resources to fight back. For believing justice mattered enough to wait 4 years for this moment. Thank you for having the courage to stand up when you could have taken the easy way out. Victor moved toward the door. Catherine will handle everything from here. The court filings, the child support negotiations, all of it. You focus on Isabella. Focus on building a life where you're not looking over your shoulder anymore. What about you? What happens now that Marcus is destroyed? Victor paused, his hand on the doorknob. Now I visit my brother. Tell him that the man who ruined his life finally faced consequences. It won't give him back the years he lost or the family that left him, but Maybe it'll give him some measure of peace. I hope it does, Lena said sincerely. Antonio deserves that much. After Victor left, Lena stood alone in the suite with her sleeping daughter, watching the news coverage cycle through its analysis of Marcus Webb's spectacular fall from grace. Political experts were already writing obituaries for his Senate campaign. Legal analysts were estimating his child support obligations based on his income. Social commentators were dissecting the hypocrisy of a family values candidate who'd abandoned his own child. None of them knew the whole story. None of them knew about the lonely nights when Lena had worked the graveyard shift 8 months pregnant, terrified she'd give birth alone. None of them knew about the systematic erasure Marcus had orchestrated, the threats he'd made, the cruelty he'd shown. But they knew enough. They knew Marcus Webb was a father who'd refused to acknowledge his daughter until he was forced to. And that truth by itself was enough to destroy everything he'd built on lies. Lena's phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "This is Sofia Romano, Antonio's ex-wife. I saw the news. What you did took incredible courage. I'm sorry for what you went through, and I'm glad you had someone willing to help you fight back." The message surprised her. Catherine had mentioned Sofia in passing, the wife who'd left Antonio when his world collapsed, who'd taken their daughters and disappeared to protect them from the scandal. Lena typed back carefully. "Thank you. I'm sorry for what your family went through. I hope Antonio finds peace now." The response came quickly. "He called me tonight, first time in 3 years. He said watching Marcus Webb face consequences made him feel like maybe the world wasn't completely broken after all. So thank you for that too." Lena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of what they'd accomplished settle over her like a blanket. One man's career destroyed, another man's faith partially restored. A daughter who would grow up knowing her existence had never been a mistake, even if her father had treated it as one. Justice, it turned out, looked a lot messier than she'd imagined. It came with collateral damage and complicated emotions and the knowledge that winning didn't erase all the pain that had come before. But it also came with truth, with accountability, with the fundamental affirmation that powerful men couldn't simply erase inconvenient lives without consequence. That was worth fighting for. Isabella stirred in her arms, making small sounds as she transitioned between sleep cycles. Lena carried her to the window, looking out at the city that had tried to swallow them both whole and somehow hadn't succeeded. "Your father knows who you are now," she whispered to her daughter. "The whole world knows you exist. And someday when you're old enough to understand, I'll tell you the whole story. Not to make you hate him, but so you know that your worth was never determined by whether he chose to see it." Below, the news vans were starting to disperse. The story had broken, the damage was done, and now came the long, tedious work of legal proceedings and custody arrangements, and building a future from the wreckage of the past. But tonight Lena let herself feel the victory of simply being seen, of refusing to disappear, of standing up for her daughter, even when the cost seemed too high. Tonight, she'd proven that truth mattered more than power, that accountability was possible even for men who thought themselves above it. Tonight, invisible became undeniable. And that, Lena thought as she held her daughter close, was worth every terrifying moment it had taken to get here. The settlement negotiations took 6 weeks of bitter, exhausting legal warfare that left Lena wondering if Marcus would ever stop fighting. His lawyers filed motion after motion, each one designed to minimize his financial obligations, to restrict his involvement to the bare legal minimum, to ensure that acknowledging Isabella cost him as little as possible. Catherine met each motion with ironclad responses, armed with the DNA evidence and the documentation of Marcus's intimidation tactics. By the 3rd week, even Marcus's high-priced legal team seemed tired of the fight. The final settlement came through on a gray December morning. Lena sat in Catherine's office, Isabella dozing in her carrier, and read through the terms with hands that had finally stopped shaking. Child support calculated at 18% of Marcus's substantial income, backdated to Isabella's birth. A college fund established with immediate contributions. Medical expenses covered in full. And perhaps most importantly, legal acknowledgement of paternity on Isabella's birth certificate with Marcus's name listed as father. "He's also agreed to relinquish any claim to custody or visitation," Catherine said, watching Lena's face carefully. "He doesn't want to be part of Isabella's life beyond the financial obligations." The words should have hurt more than they did. But Lena had spent 6 weeks watching Marcus fight against every form of responsibility, had seen how desperately he wanted to pretend Isabella didn't exist beyond what the law required. She'd stopped hoping for anything more. "That's fine," she said quietly. "Better that than having him drift in and out of her life when it's convenient for him." "Are you sure? We could push for visitation rights, make sure he's—" "No," Lena's voice was firm. "Isabella deserves better than a father who shows up out of obligation. If Marcus doesn't want to know her, that's his loss. But I'm not going to force him into her life just so she can feel his resentment every time he looks at her." Catherine nodded slowly. "Then we have everything we need. I'll file the final paperwork with the court. By the end of the week, this will all be official." "And then what?" "Then you decide what comes next. You have financial security now. You have legal protection. You have the freedom to build whatever life you want for yourself and Isabella." Catherine's expression softened slightly. "What do you want, Lena?" It was the same question Victor had asked that first night in the hospital, and Lena's answer had changed in the months since. "I want to finish my degree," she said. "I was 3 semesters away from graduating when I started working for Marcus. I want to complete that. I want Isabella to grow up watching me work for things, not just survive on child support from a man who didn't want us." "That's good. That's really good." Catherine pulled out a folder. Victor actually anticipated that. He set up an education fund, separate from Marcus's obligations. It'll cover tuition, books, childcare while you're in classes. Lena stared at the folder. He didn't have to do that. He wanted to. He said— Catherine paused, choosing her words carefully. "He said his brother never got the chance to rebuild his life the way he deserved. He wants to make sure you have that chance." The generosity of it made Lena's throat tight. "I need to thank him." "You can do that yourself. He's waiting downstairs." Lena gathered Isabella and her things, signed the final documents Catherine needed, and took the elevator down to the lobby with her heart pounding. She hadn't seen Victor since the night of the fundraiser, had only communicated through Catherine as the lawyer had insisted. But she'd thought about him often, wondered if he'd found the peace he was looking for now that Marcus had faced consequences. He stood near the windows, looking out at the December gray, his dark coat making him seem like a shadow against the pale light. He turned when he heard her approach, and something in his expression eased. "Lena, how are you?" Exhausted, relieved, grateful. She shifted Isabella's carrier to her other hand. "Catherine told me about the education fund. Victor, I can't accept—" "Yes, you can." His tone was gentle but left no room for argument. "Consider it an investment in the future. Isabella is going to need a mother who believes in herself, who fights for what she wants. Watching you finish your degree will teach her that. You've already done so much. The apartment, the lawyers, everything. And now I'm doing one more thing. Let me, Lena, let me help ensure you have the tools to build a real future, not just survive the present." Isabella chose that moment to wake up, her small face scrunching before she let out an indignant cry. Lena automatically reached to unbuckle her, lifting her daughter out and settling her against her shoulder. Victor watched with an expression Lena couldn't quite read. She's grown. 3 months old next week. Time moves differently when you're sleep-deprived. Lena rubbed Isabella's back, soothing her. "How's Antonio? Did you tell him about Marcus?" Something shifted in Victor's face. "I did. We had coffee last week, first time we've really talked in 4 years." "How was it?" "Difficult, honest." Victor's hand slipped into his coat pockets. "He's still angry about what happened, still processing what my choices cost him. But he said watching Marcus face consequences helped him understand that the world isn't completely broken, that powerful men can't always escape their sins. That's something. It's more than we had before." Victor's eyes moved back to Isabella, watching her settle against Lena's shoulder. "He asked about you, about the baby. He said what you did took more courage than he'd been able to find when his own life fell apart. I had help. I had you protecting me, giving me resources Antonio never had." "You had a choice," Victor corrected. "You could have taken Marcus's settlement and disappeared. You chose to fight instead. That's not about resources, Lena. That's about character." The words settled over her like a weight and a gift at the same time. Isabella had fallen back asleep, her warm weight solid and real against Lena's chest. "What happens now?" she asked. "With you, I mean. Now that Marcus is destroyed, now that you've gotten your revenge, what do you do next? Victor was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her with that same intensity that had made her feel seen from the very first night. I don't know, he admitted. I spent 4 years focused on one goal. Now that it's achieved, I'm not sure what comes after. Maybe you could try just living, Lena suggested softly. Not planning revenge or managing criminal operations or protecting people from their enemies, just existing without a war to fight. Is that what you're planning to do? I'm planning to raise my daughter, finish my degree, and build a life where we're not defined by what Marcus did or didn't do. Lena met his eyes directly. And I'm planning to remember that the person who helped me when I was invisible deserves to find peace too. Something flickered across Victor's face. Surprise, maybe? A recognition of something he'd been avoiding thinking about. I should let you go, he said. You have a life to build. I don't want to complicate that. Victor, the apartment is yours for as long as you need it. The education fund is set up through Catherine, completely separate from me. You won't need to see me again unless you choose to. He stepped back, creating distance. Be well, Lena. You and Isabella both. He was leaving, walking away the same way he'd walked into her life, controlled, deliberate, already moving toward whatever came next. Wait, Lena called out, making him pause. I don't want to never see you again. You're part of Isabella's story, part of how we survived. I don't want her to grow up not knowing the man who made sure we weren't alone. Victor turned back slowly. What are you asking for? I don't know, Lena admitted. Friendship, maybe. Someone who checks in occasionally, who knows our story and cares about how it ends. Is that something you'd want? The question hung between them, weighted with possibility and risk, and the kind of connection neither of them had expected to find in a convenience store at 2 a.m. I'd like that, Victor said finally. More than I probably should. Winter melted into spring, and Lena discovered what it meant to build a life instead of just surviving one. She enrolled in classes, hired a part-time nanny with money from the education fund, and found herself sitting in lecture halls again after 3 years away. The coursework was challenging, made more difficult by sleepless nights with Isabella, but Lena tackled it with the same stubborn determination that had gotten her through everything else. Marcus's child support payments arrived like clockwork, deposited into an account Lena barely touched except for Isabella's needs. She kept working part-time at a bookstore near campus, wanting to earn her own money even though she didn't strictly need to anymore. The apartment Victor had provided became a home, filled with Isabella's toys and Lena's textbooks, and the comfortable clutter of actual living. Victor kept his word about staying in touch. He called once a week, usually on Sunday mornings, asking about Lena's classes and Isabella's milestones with the careful interest of someone who genuinely wanted to know. Sometimes he'd stop by with books he thought Lena might need for her courses, or toys for Isabella that were inevitably too expensive but chosen with surprising thoughtfulness. They didn't talk about Marcus, didn't talk about the past or the revenge that had brought them together. Instead, they talked about normal things: Lena's professors, Isabella's sleep schedule, Victor's attempts to reconnect with Antonio, the small victories and frustrations of ordinary life. It was strange and comfortable, and something Lena didn't have a name for. He's courting you, Catherine said bluntly during one of their quarterly check-ins. You know that, right? Lena had laughed, uncomfortable with the idea. Victor's just being kind. He feels responsible for us. Victor Romano doesn't do anything out of mere kindness. He's one of the most calculating people I've ever met. Catherine's expression was serious. The question is whether you're interested in being courted by a man with his particular background. Lena had thought about that conversation for weeks afterward. Thought about it every time Victor called, every time he showed up with some small gift or offer of help. Thought about the careful distance he maintained, never pushing, never assuming, always giving her space to decide what she wanted. The truth was, she didn't know what she wanted. She'd spent so much energy on fighting Marcus, on protecting Isabella, on surviving each day, that she hadn't considered what came after survival. Isabella turned 6 months old on a warm May afternoon. Lena threw a small party in the apartment, just Catherine, the nanny, and a few classmates from her program. Victor showed up with a ridiculous stuffed elephant that was bigger than Isabella herself, and a cake from a bakery that definitely charged too much. You didn't have to do all this, Lena said, watching him set up the cake on the counter. I wanted to. Victor glanced at Isabella, who was being passed around between admirers, completely unaware she was the center of attention. 6 months? That's significant. Every month feels significant right now. She's changing so fast. So are you. Victor's eyes moved to Lena, taking in the changes 6 months had brought. You look happy, settled. I am. For the first time in over a year, I'm not terrified about what tomorrow might bring. Lena paused. Thank you for that. For giving me the resources to build this life. You built it yourself. I just made sure you had the tools. The party wound down as the afternoon faded into evening. Catherine left first, then the classmates, then the nanny. Suddenly it was just Lena and Victor and a very sleepy Isabella surrounded by wrapping paper and toys she was too young to appreciate. I should go, Victor said, but he didn't move toward the door. Or you could stay for dinner, Lena offered. It's just leftovers, but there's plenty. Are you sure? I'm sure. They ate at the small dining table, Isabella asleep in her swing nearby, and talked about everything and nothing. Victor told her about Antonio's progress. He'd found a better job, was seeing a therapist, had even started dating someone. Lena told him about her constitutional law class and the professor who'd encouraged her to consider law school after graduation. Would you want that? Victor asked. Law school? Maybe. I like the idea of helping people navigate systems that are designed to intimidate them. People like me who don't have resources or connections or any idea how to fight back. Lena pushed rice around her plate. Catherine inspired me. The way she fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. You'd be good at it. You understand what it's like to be powerless against people who believe they're above consequences. So do you. Victor's expression tightened. My methods for dealing with that are considerably less legal than Catherine's. But just as necessary. Lena met his eyes. You gave me justice when the law couldn't, or wouldn't. That matters too. They cleaned up together, moving around the kitchen with surprising ease. Victor washed while Lena dried, and somewhere in the comfortable silence, she realized this felt natural, felt right in a way she hadn't expected. Can I ask you something? Lena said, putting away the last plate. Always. Why do you keep coming back, really? Catherine says you're courting me, but I don't understand why. You could have anyone, Victor. Why would you want a single mother with a mountain of student debt and a schedule built around an infant's sleep cycles? Victor was quiet for a long moment, drying his hands on the dish towel with careful precision. Do you know what I saw that night in the convenience store? He asked finally. When I walked in and found you having contractions behind the counter? A chance for revenge against Marcus. No. I saw someone refusing to disappear even when every powerful force in her life was trying to erase her. I saw someone choosing truth over safety, choosing her child over convenience, choosing to stand up even when standing up meant losing everything. He turned to face her fully. I've spent my entire adult life in a world where power is the only currency that matters. And there you were, powerless by every metric I understood, and still refusing to be conquered. That's not weakness, Lena. That's the strongest thing I've ever witnessed. The words landed in Lena's chest, heavy and warm and terrifying. I'm not that strong. I was terrified every moment. I'm still terrified most days. Being strong doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and choosing courage anyway. Victor stepped closer, his dark eyes serious. You asked why I keep coming back. I keep coming back because being around you and Isabella reminds me that there are things worth fighting for besides revenge. That there's a difference between power and strength, between winning and actually building something that matters. Lena's breath caught. Victor, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I'm not pressuring you or expecting anything in return for what I've done. I just want you to know that if you ever decide you want more than friendship, more than weekly phone calls and occasional visits, I'd like to explore that. When you're ready, if you're ever ready. Isabella chose that moment to wake up with a cry that suggested she was both hungry and offended about it. Lena automatically moved to pick her up, grateful for the interruption, for time to process what Victor had just offered. She settled on the couch to nurse, and Victor sat in the chair across from them, maintaining that careful distance he always kept. I don't know if I'm ready, Lena said honestly, watching Isabella nurse. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. Marcus destroyed something in me, made me afraid to trust my own judgment about people. I understand. But she looked up, meeting his eyes. I know I want you in our lives, not just as the person who helped us, but as someone who matters, someone Isabella knows and trusts as she grows up. That's enough, Victor said quietly. That's more than enough. Summer arrived with the kind of heat that made Lena grateful for air conditioning she didn't have to ration. She finished her spring semester with honors, started a summer internship at a nonprofit legal clinic, and watched Isabella learn to sit up and then immediately try to crawl toward anything dangerous. Victor became a fixture in their lives, showing up for dinner twice a week, babysitting when Lena had evening classes, teaching Isabella to make ridiculous faces that sent her into fits of giggles. He never pushed for more than Lena offered, never made her feel pressured or obligated. But somewhere between the weekly dinners and the shared parenting moments and the conversations that stretched late into the night after Isabella was asleep, Lena realized she was falling for him. It terrified her. He's nothing like Marcus, Catherine pointed out when Lena finally admitted her feelings. Victor's been patient, respectful, honest about who he is and what he wants. He's also a criminal. He runs an organization that launders money and probably does worse things he hasn't told me about. Lena wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. What kind of mother am I if I bring that into Isabella's life? The kind who understands that people are complicated, that someone can do illegal things and still be fundamentally good. Catherine's expression was serious. But you're right to be careful. You need to know exactly what you'd be accepting if you pursue this. Lena talked to Victor that night, after Isabella was asleep and they were sitting on the balcony watching the city lights. Tell me the truth about what you do, she said. All of it. Not the sanitized version, not the things you think I can handle. I need to know who you really are. Victor was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light. I run an organization that moves money for people who can't use traditional banking. Sometimes those people are criminals. Sometimes they're just people living in countries with unstable governments who need to protect their assets. He paused. I've never ordered anyone killed. I don't deal in drugs or weapons or anything that directly harms people. But what I do is still illegal, and if I ever get caught, I'll spend the rest of my life in prison. Why do you do it? Because my father built this organization, and when he died, the responsibility fell to me and Antonio. Antonio chose legitimacy. I chose to honor our father's legacy, to protect the people who depend on the services we provide. Victor's jaw tightened. And because I'm good at it, because in a world where laws are written to protect the wealthy and punish the poor, sometimes breaking those laws is the only way to create any kind of equity. That's a justification. It is, and maybe it's a flawed one, but it's the truth. He turned to face her directly. If you want me to walk away, if you want me out of your lives because you can't accept what I do, I'll understand. I'll make sure you and Isabella are still protected, still have everything you need, but I'll go. Lena thought about it, really thought about it, thought about the risk, the moral complexity, the danger that came with loving someone who operated outside the law. Then she thought about the man who'd walked into a convenience store and truly seen her, who'd stayed through Isabella's birth when he could have left, who'd given her the resources to fight back when she had nothing, who'd been patient and kind and present in ways Marcus never had been. I don't want you to go, she said finally, but I need to know that you'll always be honest with me, that you'll never use your power against me the way Marcus did, that you'll respect my choices even when they're not what you want. I swear it. Victor's voice was firm, certain. I swear on everything I am that I will never use my resources to control you, never threaten you, never make you feel like you don't have choices. You and Isabella are free, Lena. Always. Whatever happens between us, that doesn't change. Then I want to try, Lena whispered. I want to see what this could be, even though it terrifies me. Victor reached across the space between them, taking her hand gently. We'll go as slow as you need. No pressure, no expectations. Just seeing where this goes. Where it went was towards something Lena had stopped believing in, a relationship built on honesty and respect and genuine care. Victor courted her properly, with dinners and conversations and the kind of patient attention that made her feel valued rather than claimed. He bonded with Isabella, teaching her to clap and play peekaboo and make the ridiculous elephant sounds that sent her into hysterics. And slowly, carefully, Lena let herself trust again. The first time Victor kissed her was on a September evening, after they'd put Isabella to bed together and were cleaning up the disaster zone that was the living room. He'd paused in the middle of picking up blocks, turned to her, and asked with heartbreaking formality if he could kiss her. Lena had laughed at the seriousness of it, the way he was treating her like something precious that needed permission, and said yes. The kiss was gentle, careful, nothing like the consuming passion Marcus had used to overwhelm her judgment. It was a kiss that asked rather than demanded, that offered rather than took. It was perfect. "I'm falling in love with you," Victor admitted afterward, his forehead resting against hers. "I need you to know that. I need you to know this isn't just about revenge against Marcus or guilt about what happened. This is about you, who you are, who you're becoming, the life you're building." "I'm falling in love with you too," Lena whispered back. "It scares me, but it's true. We'll figure it out together. Whatever comes, we'll handle it together." Isabella turned 1 year old on a crisp October day that felt like new beginnings. Lena threw a real party this time. Friends from school, neighbors from the building, Catherine and her wife, Antonio and his new girlfriend. Victor showed up with another ridiculously oversized stuffed animal and a quiet pride in how far they'd all come. Marcus wasn't invited, of course. Hadn't been part of Isabella's life beyond the monthly child support payments that continued like clockwork. Lena had heard through Catherine that he'd left the city entirely, taken a position at a financial firm in Chicago, and was trying to rebuild his reputation far from the scandal that had destroyed his political dreams. She didn't waste energy hating him anymore, didn't spend nights thinking about what he'd done or what he'd cost her. Marcus was Isabella's father biologically, but he'd chosen to be nothing more than a financial obligation, and Lena had made peace with that. Isabella had everything she needed: a mother who fought for her, an extended family of people who loved her, and Victor, who'd stepped into the role Marcus had abandoned and did it with patience and genuine care. As the party wound down and guests began leaving, Lena found Victor outside on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. "Thank you," she said, wrapping her arms around him from behind, "for all of this, for making sure Isabella's first birthday was about joy instead of absence." Victor covered her hands with his, pulling her closer. "She deserves joy. You both do. We have it now. Because of you." "No. You built this life, Lena. I just made sure you had the space to build it in." He turned to face her, his dark eyes serious. "I have something I want to ask you." Lena's heart jumped. "Okay. Move in with me. Not this apartment. A house. Somewhere with a yard for Isabella to play in, a home office for your studies, space for all of us to grow." He paused. "I'm not asking you to marry me, not yet. I know you need time, need to be sure, but I want us to build something together, a real family, chosen and intentional." Lena thought about it carefully, thought about the risk, the trust required, the leap of faith. Then she thought about how far she'd come from that terrified woman working the graveyard shift in a convenience store, believing she'd give birth alone and invisible. "Yes," she said. "Let's build something together." They found a house in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and a backyard perfect for a toddler's adventures. Lena graduated with honors the following spring, was accepted into law school for the fall, and watched Isabella take her first steps in a home that felt permanent and safe. Victor formally proposed on Isabella's second birthday, with a ring he'd had designed specifically for Lena and a question he asked while their daughter played nearby, completely oblivious to the moment's significance. "I know I'm not what you imagined when you thought about getting married," he said, kneeling in their living room. "I know my life is complicated, that there are risks that come with loving me. But I swear to you, Lena, I will spend every day proving that you and Isabella are the most important thing in my world. I will protect you, honor you, and never make you feel like you don't have choices. Will you marry me?" Lena said yes through tears, not because she'd forgotten the risk or the complexity, but because she'd learned that love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone who saw you completely, chose you freely, and committed to building something real together. They married quietly 6 months later, with Isabella as the flower girl and Antonio as Victor's best man. Marcus wasn't mentioned, wasn't thought about, wasn't given space in the joy of the day. Lena started law school that fall, specialized in family law, and discovered she had a gift for helping people navigate systems designed to intimidate them. Victor slowly, carefully, began transitioning his organization toward legitimate business, using his connections and resources to build something legal his children could inherit without shame. Isabella grew up knowing she had a father who'd chosen her even though biology didn't require it, and another father who existed only as child support payments and a lesson about consequences. She grew up watching her mother fight for justice, watching Victor rebuild his life around chosen family rather than blood obligation. She grew up knowing her worth had never been determined by whether Marcus Webb acknowledged her, but by the people who'd chosen to love her anyway. 5 years after that night in the convenience store, Lena stood in their backyard watching Isabella play with her younger brother, Victor's son, born 2 years into their marriage. She thought about invisible becoming undeniable, about survival becoming actual living, about revenge transforming into something that looked a lot like redemption. Victor came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked quietly. "Completely." Lena leaned back against him, watching their children play in the late afternoon sun. "Sometimes I think about that night, about how terrified I was, how certain I was that I'd be alone. And then you walk through those doors. Best convenience store visit I ever made." Lena laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "You came for revenge. You stayed for you. For the chance to build something real instead of just destroying what someone else built." Victor's expression was soft, open in a way it never had been before Lena. "Antonio told me last week that watching us helped him understand that redemption is possible, that people can change, can choose differently, can build new families from the wreckage of old ones." Is he happy? Getting there. He's engaged, building a relationship with his daughters again, finding his way back to the man he was before Marcus destroyed his life. Victor paused. He asked if Isabella could be a flower girl at his wedding, if that's okay with you. "Of course it's okay. She's family. All of this." Lena gestured at the house, the yard, the children playing, the life they'd built. "Is family. Chosen, intentional, real." Victor kissed her, soft and sure, while their children's laughter filled the air around them. This was what justice looked like when it transformed into something more than revenge. This was what happened when invisible women refused to disappear, when powerful men finally faced consequences, when broken people chose to build something new instead of just surviving in the ruins. This was the life Lena Cruz had fought for. Not perfect, not without complexity or risk, but genuine and chosen and completely, utterly hers. Isabella called out, wanting her parents to watch her new trick on the swing set. Lena and Victor moved together to admire their daughter's accomplishment, their hands linked, their future spreading out before them like an unwritten story waiting to be claimed. Marcus Webb existed somewhere in that future as monthly payments and a biological fact, but he didn't define it anymore. Couldn't touch the family Lena had built from the ashes of his abandonment. She'd started invisible, a problem to be erased. She'd become undeniable, a truth that couldn't be buried. And now she was simply Lena, wife, mother, law student, survivor, fighter, woman who'd learned that the opposite of invisible wasn't just being seen. It was choosing to be fully, authentically, courageously present in your own life, regardless of who tried to erase you. That was the real victory. That was justice transformed into joy. And that, Lena thought as she watched her daughter spin in circles while her son tried to keep up, was worth every terrifying moment it had taken to get here.